The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading From Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night, about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been. And they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are three main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number one, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics. This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number two, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, there's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more. The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm of the President.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. If you are hearing me right now live, and hopefully you are, a million apologies if you couldn't hear me live yesterday. I know that some of our streams worked and some didn't, and we just, it was engineering hell. But I think everything is working today, which is really a good thing. And because we just moved and we've got all new equipment, and it's kind of a learning curve here for all of us. So that's what's going on. The Pentagon this morning, actually I guess it was last night, the Pentagon posted this from Mary Poppenfuss over at Huffington Post. The Pentagon posted an unusual message on Twitter Thursday urging President Donald Trump to resign. Yes, the Pentagon tweeted that. It has the Twitter sphere going, collectively scratching its head. They deleted the tweet as soon as it was pointed out. But some of the responses, Bill Legate, shout out to the deep state operatives in the Department of Defense, Deep State Squirrel, Team Deep State Squirrel. There are lots of us, we just can't speak openly. Whoa, you got retweeted by, this is Proud Resistor was the one who got retweeted. And yes, Donald Trump should resign. Very interesting. The Al Franken thing is turning into a thing or not. It seems, it's Kirsten Gillibrand saying, well, Bill Clinton probably should have resigned back in the day. But acknowledging may be the wrong word. By the way, it's Anything Goes Friday, so give us a shout if there's anything on your mind, 202-808-9925. But Kirsten Gillibrand saying, as I've said many times over the last couple of weeks, it appears to me that what's happening is a large cultural shift is happening in the United States, and frankly, I think it's spreading at least around the Western world, around the developed world. And that, women are just saying enough. We're sick of it. Enough. And men are, if Al Franken's response is any indication, men are getting it, at least some men, and saying, okay, got it. That was different and wrong and all that kind of. So, we'll see where all this goes. Let's pick up some phone calls. Is Louise, is the board open for calls? Apparently it is. Steve in Salem, Ohio. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, first of all, I wanted to say, because 3 or 4 days ago, they were upping the Korean leader said this, and what's Trump going to say? And I thought that is the most dangerous thing they could possibly ever do, is to try to make a playground, like a grade school playground thing about this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And lately I haven't heard that, so maybe cooler minds have said, hey, knock that crap off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, and another thing, and as you said it, about this, the groping and all that stuff. You know what? I was just thinking, I'm 60 years old, and, in truth, if I have to say truth, I have been attracted to, younger women if they're fully developed and stuff like that. But you know what? My dad told me, no, that is wrong, and it will ruin that woman's first sexual experiences or whatever down the road. And that's the thought that always stuck in my mind, and I guess that's good bad advice, but
But see, what's happening right now, Steve, and I think it's a really good thing, is that we're going from dads saying this, and a lot of dads never said that, to culture, society saying that, and I think that that's a really, really good thing. Steve, thank you for the call. And yeah, the whole thing with Trump and Korea, I absolutely agree. This is a crisis right now. We're not dealing with it like a crisis, but I believe it is. Joan in Alexander, North Carolina. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, I was wondering what you think of the theory that maybe the Republicans are pulling a sort of bait and switch thing here. That a few days ago you talked about the connections between Moore and somebody that is heavily involved with the Koch brothers. And I thought, well, the Koch brothers vet people pretty carefully. They wouldn't let somebody like him without Moore in without checking him out thoroughly. So maybe their goal is similar to the one they're doing with Trump and Pence, where they'll let Trump get in as long as he gets his tax plan passed, and then as soon as that's over with, they'll discredit him, and we'll end up with Pence, who was who they really wanted anyway. And kind of the same thing going on maybe with Moore and whatever that guy is he's running against.
Yeah.
I think we saw
Doug
the same
Jones
thing here in Asheville over a small seat where somebody got won and then resigned and wanted to turn it over to a person who didn't win. Anyway, what do you think?
I can't speak to what the Koch brothers are thinking or what their strategy is. I don't know them. I don't know how they think, and I'm not inside their organization. But
have you read Dark Money by
Yes,
Jane
I did,
Mayer?
by Jane Mayer, yeah. In fact, she's been a guest on this program at some length. And it's not the only book. Democracy in Chains is another great book that's kind of a sequel to that by Nancy McLean, as I recall. And but I think my personal opinion about what's going on, and again, this is just my opinion, it may or may not be correct, is that that probably the large donor base, and the Kochs would be part of that, but I think that this is much more general than that. I think that probably the large donor base is really just interested in getting their damn tax cuts and their deregulation. They also want, a lot of stuff is being done that these guys, not specifically the Kochs, but the large Republican donor class, that the Republican donor class wants done. You've got the Keystone Pipeline happening, even though they spilled a couple 100,000 gallons of oil yesterday Oh, jeez. They got their oil pipeline. They got their deregulation of the oil industry to a large extent. They're getting deregulation of the internet probably next month. They're getting deregulation of the banks right now. They got Richard Cordray out of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and it looks like he's going to be replaced maybe by Ryan Zinke, or I mean, you know, excuse me, Mick Mulvaney is the guy that they're thinking of replacing him with, the guy who's the head of the Office of Management and Budget, who was one of the wackiest of the right-wing Tea Party trolls, which would be, you know, basically the Koch trolls. So yeah, they're getting what they want, and the other thing that they want, of course, legislatively, is a giant tax cut. And they didn't at least they said they didn't support Trump. It was Robert Mercer and his daughter Rebecca who supported Trump in the primary, or in the general election in 2016, and in the primary, I guess. But I don't think that the really big money and the corporate money supported Trump early on. I think that probably they are now, or supported Roy Moore for that matter. They just, you know, it's just that they're not fighting him. And they're letting the other parts of the Republican machine. I mean, there's so many different parts of this giant Republican machine that have a lot of money and have their own interests. You've got the anti-abortion part, you've got the fundamentalist Christian part, you've got the gun manufacturers and lobby part, you've got the chemical companies and their lobbyist part, you've got the big food companies and their lobbyists, you've got the internet companies and their lobbyists. There's all these different parts, and they all have their own agendas. But the agenda that is consistent across all of them is figure out new ways to extract cash from the American middle class and transfer it to the top 1% and the corporations that made them the 1%. That's always the bottom line. And that's what Roy Moore will do. That's what Donald Trump is doing. That's what Republicans in Congress are doing. That's what we're seeing with this tax break. So at a certain level, it almost doesn't matter whether the Kochs like Roy Moore or not. You know, he has enough of the different parts of the so-called Republican coalition. You know, the haters, the fearers, and the furors. That's what's going on. Joan, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be back with more of your calls and my thoughts and the news of the day, including some really sad news about the Affordable Care Act right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Judy in Lakeport, California. Hey, Judy. What's up?
Good morning, Tom. I hardly know where to start.
Sure.
But I really need to speak to something that's happening with Al Franken. You know, there is no comparison to what Al Franken did to what Roy Moore has done or what Donald Trump has done. And it's just so obvious.
Or apparently what George Herbert Walker Bush did. You know, like a ninth woman came forward today and said, yeah, he grabbed my ass, and this was when he was president. So
I have a hard time hearing you, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judy. Pop me up a little bit. Yeah, I said it's not even as big a deal as what George Herbert Walker Bush did. A ninth woman came out today and said he grabbed her butt only this time while he was president.
Exactly, and that's the first thing I need to speak to. The other thing is this. Today, I'm more outraged. I mean, it's like, how much can you take that Trump has lifted the ban on killing elephants for the ivory?
Yeah, and soon to be lions.
It's so obvious that he did this for his sons, who are big game hunters. And you know, Tom, I've reached a point where I see our country going in a direction, it's almost like a runaway train, and that Donald Trump is the engineer, and he is driving us towards extinction. He is the symbol of where it's at today, and I just think we do what we can. We're ethical people. There's a lot of us out here, a lot of empathetic people, but I feel like it's all about extinction.
Yeah, I agree, Judy, and you know, it's almost like Donald Trump has decided that democracy is a nice, quaint idea, but it doesn't really work all that well. And his role model is the Saudis, or the Chinese, or the Vietnamese, or the Philippines. I mean, these countries with these strongmen leaders that he, or Russia, these countries with strongman leaders that he thinks, gee, that's how the United States should be. And, for a long time, there's that old quote, it's probably apocryphal, I don't know if it's real or not, but I've heard it so many times in my life, that George Washington allegedly said, "It has been my observation that what one competent man can do well, several competent men will not accomplish with speed, and a committee will never get around to." I'm paraphrasing terribly, but because it was the language of the 18th century. But and then that, I mean, there's a certain amount of truth to that. But, that is like an anti-democratic sentiment that has been long held up on the right as, the reason for autocracy, why we should have a strongman president. And I think that Donald Trump has completely bought into that. And, so, yeah, his family wants to go big game hunting. Oh, sure, we'll let big game hunting happen. His family wants to inherit his billions. Oh, yeah, sure, we'll do away with the inheritance tax. He doesn't want to pay the alternative minimum tax, which in 2005, the one tax return we've seen, he paid, $25 million on. This new tax bill will save him that $25 million every year. He doesn't want to be regulated in his real estate dealings and his offshore money and whatnot. So, he's going to put Steve Mnuchin in there and make sure that those regulations go away, and on it goes. I agree with you, Judy, and I think it's not to mention the climate change stuff, and that really is extinction. You're absolutely right. Judy, well said. Thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. The Affordable Care Act is starting to creak and groan under the weight of Donald Trump doing away with subsidies, cutting back on the, we've gone from a 8 or 10 or 12-week window for sign-up for affordable care down to 6 weeks. They stripped hundreds of millions of dollars or millions of dollars out of the budget to advertise the fact that, hey, right now you can sign up for Obamacare, and if you want a bronze plan, in many parts of the United States, you can get it for free. And in other parts of the United States, because of these, the way the market is shaking out right now, the gold plan is actually cheaper than the silver plan. So check out Obamacare, right? Well, that's what a lot of people are doing right now. But, on the other hand, a great piece by Colby Itkowitz in today's Washington Post, or yesterday's Washington Post, actually day before yesterday's Washington Post. Parents of 4-year-old with cancer can't buy ACA plan to cover her hospital care. And, it's kind of a long, convoluted story, and I'm not going to go through all the details of it. But the bottom line is Trump's attempted disruption of the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, is actually beginning to work, and it's starting by killing a 4-year-old with cancer. Good job, Donald. Good job. Jack in Viola, Wisconsin. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind today?
Good morning from the hills here in Wisconsin.
Thank you, Jack.
Say, you a lot of times talk about the hunting and gathering and the farmers being kind of like the original sin.
Mm-hmm.
I want to present another perspective about that, because really, if you're familiar with like Gimpetus and the feminist archaeologists, talk about the farming culture of old Europe being much more peaceful and being fairly classless. And it is the Eurasians that came in, the pastoral people, who came in.
You're talking about 3,000 years ago plus, right?
3,000. The last wave was 2,800 BC. And the farmers.
This was the Celts, wasn't it?
The plow. I'll call them the plow and planted land cult, who swept from out of Anatolia, went east and west, and in the west we know about their Neolithic monuments and stuff that they did.
Right.
And we also know genetically the hunting and gathering women, a lot of them, started to come over and marry into the colonization or the spread of farming. And so these people weren't, hierarchical or, warlike or anything like that. So the farmers get a bad rap, even in the Bible, when you talk about Cain and Abel.
Right.
It's an interesting slam against the farmers that the herders, kind of the old, like the Wild West, the herders, the ranchers against the farmers type of thing.
Exactly.
But keep on hearing that. And the other thing that you should consider.
Well, hang on just a second, Jack, before you move on. What this story tells is that technology changes everything. Disruptive technologies change things. And the technology that was developed roughly 10,000 years ago apparently in Northern Europe was a technology to deal with seasonal variations. There's no food growing in the winter, so what do we do? If there's not enough, if you can't hunt enough in the winter, how do you survive? And what they figured out was intensive agriculture, dedicating land to agriculture and doing it in an intensive fashion, produced enough surplus food in the summer that they could live through the winter. That was a technological change, and that techological change radically altered society. Other technological changes throughout history include...
To lay at their feet the hierarchical civilization, warfare, and stuff like that, when they were really matrilineal, probably their sexual politics were more like bonobo than chimpanzee, and that like Gloria Steinem says, when you had to control female sexuality and ensure paternity, you violate this original sexual freedom and equality that were among the farmers.
Right.
So
among the hunter-gatherers, not the farmers.
That piece of information needs to be out there, and probably I respect and share the sentiment of the sacredness of this planet. But there's also idea that the Neolithic probably had an earth god and probably had a sky goddess, as the last remnant of that is in Egypt between Geb and Nuit.
Yep.
I'm just saying, the language we use shapes our perception.
Oh, absolutely. And language is a reflection of culture.
The idea of making the...
I don't think anybody can hear me, Sean. Oh, well, Jack, you can hear me?
Yeah, I
can
hear you.
Okay. I thought, okay.
Did you hear what I said?
Yeah, I did. No, I'm agreeing. I'm saying that language...
that comment to the whole mix of things.
Right. Language has embedded within it the whole of culture. It's one of the reasons why when you learn a language, you learn a culture. It's one of the reasons why the fact that we have, hundreds of languages going extinct every year around the world, these mostly Aboriginal and Indigenous languages, is a real disaster for all of us, for civilization. And I would argue, you said that the farming people were sexually egalitarian. No, it was the hunter-gatherers who were sexually egalitarian. When agriculture started, women began to be treated, and you find this in the Bible. This is the original warning. Women began to be treated like breed stock, basically, like cattle, and to produce more men, and that There's one of the original sins in our culture. But your points are well made, Jack, and obviously you're well informed on this issue. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this. It's our Anything Goes Friday/weekend.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Jane Mayer's new book, Dark Money, the history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right. And it's, by the way, just an extraordinary, astonishing book. This is from chapter 19, sort of the introductory chapter. And she's talking about one of the Koch summits where all these billionaires get together and plan strategy and throw money into the pot and that kind of thing. The highlight of the Koch summit in 2009 was, which, by the way, was the year President Obama's first year in office, was an uninhibited debate about what conservatives should do next in the face of their electoral defeat. As the donors and other guests dined in the hotel's banquet room like Roman senators attending a gladiator duel in the forum, they watched a passionate argument unfold that encapsulated the stark choice ahead. Sitting on one side of the stage facing the participants was the Texas Senator John Cornyn, the head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee and former Justice on the Texas Supreme Court. Poised on the other side of the moderator was the South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint, a conservative provocateur who defined the outermost anti-establishment fringe of the Republican Party and who, in the words of one admirer, was the leader of the Huns. 57 at the time, he was 5 months older than Cornyn, but his dark hair, lean build, and more casual aw-shucks style made him appear years younger. Before his election to Congress, DeMint had run an advertising agency in South Carolina. He understood how to sell, and what he was pitching that night was an approach to politics that, according to the historian Sean Willits, would have been recognizable to DeMint's forebearers in the Palmetto State as akin to the radical nullification of federal power advocated in the 1860s by the Confederate secessionist John C. Calhoun. The two Republican senators had been at loggerheads for some time. That night, they gave opposing opening statements. Cornyn spoke in favor of the Republican Party fighting its way back to victory by broadening its appeal to a wider swath of voters, including moderates. In contrast, DeMint portrayed compromise as surrender. He had little patience for the slow-moving process of constitutional government. He regarded many of his Senate colleagues as timid and self-serving. The federal government posed such a dire threat to the dynamism of the American economy, in his view, that anything less than all-out war on regulations and spending was a cop-out. DeMint was the face of a new kind of extremism, and he spoke that evening in favor of purifying rather than diluting the Republican Party. He argued that he would rather have 30 Republicans who believed in something than a majority who believed in nothing, a line that was a mantra for him and that brought cheers and applause from the gathered onlookers. Rather than compromising their principles and working with the new administration, the Obama administration, DeMint argued, Republicans needed to take a firm stand against Obama, waging a campaign of massive resistance and obstruction regardless of the 2008 election outcome. Then they go through a discussion about how they debated, the TARP, and DeMint had voted against it, Cornyn for it, and, some of the just issue things. Sitting silently at a table in the front row through all this were Charles Koch and his wife Liz. No one came to Cornyn's defense. It was widely assumed that the Kochs, as hardcore free market enthusiasts, had opposed the huge government bailouts of the private sector. Later, many reporters assumed this too, ascribing the Kochs' opposition to Obama as stemming from a principled disagreement over issues such as the TARP bailouts. But none of this was true. Had people checked the records, they would have found it quite revealing. At first, the Kochs political organization, Americans for Prosperity, had in fact taken what appeared to be a principled libertarian position against the bank bailouts. But the organization quickly and quietly reversed sides when the bottom began to fall out of the stock market, threatening the Kochs' own vast investment portfolio. The market had begun to collapse on Monday, September 29, when, in the face of heavy opposition from conservatives, the House unexpectedly failed to pass a federal rescue plan. By the end of the day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had fallen 777 points, losing 6.9% of its value. It was the stock market's largest one-day drop ever. Although some conservative groups and politicians such as DeMint still opposed the bailout, the market panic was enough to change many minds. And among those who flipped during the next 48 hours were the Kochs. But if the Kochs' personal interest in protecting their portfolio had trumped their free market principles, they weren't about to mention it in front of a group full of libertarians whose cash they wanted to combat Obama. Instead, the sentiment among the donors, as the first Koch seminar of the Obama era came to an end, was, as one witness put it, like a bunch of gorillas beating their chests. After hearing both sides out, the assembled guests chose the path of extremism. The Kochs had already concluded that they would need to resort to extraordinary political measures to achieve their goals. A few days before the January 2009 donor seminar, Charles and David Koch had privately weighed their options with their longtime political strategist in a meeting inside the black glass fortress that served as Koch Industries' corporate headquarters in Wichita, Kansas. Advisors to Obama later acknowledged he had no inkling of what he was up against. He had campaigned as a partisan politician who had idealistically taken issue with those who liked to slice and dice our country into red and blue states. His vision, like his own racial blend and geographic heredity, was one of reconciliation, not division. The sentiment was laudable, but alas, wishful thinking. The newly sworn-in president looked down at the ground directly beneath his polished shoes. The book Dark Money by Jane Mayer.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Sean in Fountain Valley, California. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just want to say, for one, you are a true patriot. I love what you do. You and David Pakman are the best, and keep doing it. Keep fighting the good fight. But I wanted to ask your opinion on U.S.-Mexico relations. Because the way I see it currently, we have this better-than-thou mentality as Americans. There doesn't seem to be much mutual respect like we do with, say, Canada.
Right.
And and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the solution is kind of simple in a way that if we had a competent president and competent government that partnered with the Mexicans and ensured them, like, hey, we are here to help you fight your two key issues, corruption and crime. And I would think with that would not only improve the lives of Mexicans and the quality of that country, but also it would improve the quality and well-being of Americans.
I agree, and I think
I'm just looking.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Tom.
Well, I was just going to say, I think in some regards, the Obama administration moved us in that direction in some very positive ways. But right now, with the government and the administration we have, we've got a bit of a problem with regard to Mexico. And not just Mexico. I'd say this also applies to all the Muslim countries in the world. And that is that you've got an institution, the deep state, as it were, right? A government that, well, not even so much the deep state, because that's mostly all the bureaucrats who work in Washington, D.C. It's really the elected officials. You've got a Congress that is committed to doing the bidding of big multinational corporations, which means, moving jobs down to Mexico and whatnot. At the same time that you've got a president who's committed to trashing Mexicans and anybody else who speaks a language other than English or whose skin is a little bit darker than mine. And those two things are dissonant, right? They clash with each other. And so the president's message is, be a bigot about Mexico, and Ford's message is, hey, we want to build cars in Mexico, but neither of them, neither the president nor the corporate Republicans who are, shilling for the big corporations, neither one of them are saying, we want to do what's the best thing for the American middle class, for the American working people. And, if you want to hear that, you've got to go to the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is made up, I believe, entirely of Democrats. And they're talking about, hey, let's negotiate, fair bilateral trade deals. Let's do away with NAFTA, particularly the part of NAFTA that what's called Chapter 11, which says that corporations can sue the United States. Mexican corporations can sue the United States because they wanted to do business here in a particular way, but our regulations prevented them from doing that. I'm waiting for a Mexican corporation to sue us on our child labor laws, for example. I mean, under Chapter 11, they can sue us on pretty much anything. They did away with our dolphin-safe tuna through that mechanism. So we've got some serious problems, but you're right, Sean. But, both the executive branch of our government and the legislative branch of our government are committed to screwing all of us, in different ways. Trump wants to do it for political power. The Republicans in Congress want to do it for money. Sean, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Michael in, Tatlioco Lake, Canada. Do I have that right, Michael?
That's correct.
Whoa, I got it right. Okay, so what's up?
Okay, well, I've heard you calling before about wanting to hear about people who experience health care in Canada. I'm a family doctor here, and I've lived here all my life. And just to give you an idea, the Canada Health Act a federal act that provides guarantees minimal standards for healthcare across Canada. Mm-hmm. And one of the minimal standards is that it's portable, which means that any citizen in Canada can travel anywhere in Canada and get health care. For an example, a few years ago I broke my hip, and I live in a rural area. I got picked up by the ambulance, got taken to the local hospital, and then flown in a Learjet down to Vancouver, where I got treated. I spent a week in hospital there, got flown back by jet to my local hospital, and 2 months later I got a bill for $500 for my contribution to the jet.
Wow.
Absolutely no cost for any of the healthcare.
No deductibles.
When you present to a hospital or a doctor's office, you open your wallet and you present your driver's license, and which is a combined driver's license and care card, and that everything gets paid for.
No deductibles, no copays?
Nothing.
Wow.
Absolutely nothing. I say that.
So what is that, Michael, what does that cost you as a citizen of Canada to have access to that kind of insanely...
I'm 63 years old. I have my wife. We pay $115 Canadian a month, which is probably about $80 US.
That's your Medicare premium?
Yes.
$80 a month. And that's for
$80 US a month.
For the two of you, and it provides complete comprehensive care, including Learjets.
Everything. And that means, like, if I need a hip replacement, if I need cancer treatment, if I need a CT scan, an MRI, it's all paid for. Now I hear a lot of comments about rationing of healthcare. It isn't rationed. One of our big problems is that there's a lack of enough healthcare providers to doctors and nurses to meet the growing demand. And what has changed over the years is the number of the way doctors work. When I first started out, doctors work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and now they don't. And people want a better lifestyle. And I would estimate now it takes about 3 doctors to do the work that one doctor used to do, and consequently, they just can't keep up with the medical schools and nursing schools can't keep up with the demand. Right. And there isn't any rationing here. Everything is kind of prorated. So we pay $115, but if that's because that would be the maximum amount you could pay. If you make less money, more and more of that would get subsidized by the government, and if you're below a certain level, it would be absolutely free.
Michael, as a physician, and this is a personal question, so feel free to tell me it's none of my business, but I'm curious. I'm curious. Well, in fact, not even talking about you, just broadly speaking. Here in the United States, an oncologist can easily make over $1 million a year. A general practitioner can typically make around $200,000 a year. Most specialties in between, orthopedic surgeons and heart surgeons and whatnot, make somewhere on the high end of that, $500,000 to $1 million a year. How are doctors paid in Canada?
Very well, and don't let anybody tell you that they're not. Especially if you're willing to work in a more remote rural area like I did. I working in a rural area make double of what somebody would make in a city like
How much is that, though?
Toronto, Montreal, because there's lots of incentives to get people.
See, I
would say the amount that doctors get paid is comparable to the States, but in Canadian dollars, the specialists may not make quite as much. Right. But there's no when you're billing for patients, I mean, all you need is their name and their card, their health care card number. You entered it into a computer, and 2 weeks later, you get a check from the government.
Wow. So you don't have overhead, you don't have losses, you don't have administrative expenses.
No, we have overhead. I mean, you have to pay. It depends where you work. I worked in a rural area, and the local government paid for. I didn't pay anything for overhead.
No, but I mean, in overhead, what I meant was you don't have like 3 staff. Like I had back surgery last year, and I was dealing with this orthopedic clinic and whatnot. And they had like 3 people in this, I think it was a 10 or 12 person practice, who did nothing but bill insurance companies.
Yeah.
That was 3 full-time employees who were doing nothing but hassling and fighting with insurance companies. You don't have to do that. You just submit the bill.
No, and there are exceptions. Like as long as what you're there's a set with the Canada Health Act. It's a federal act, and all the provinces, which are like your states, have to sign on to it. But it's the provinces that actually make the whole system work, and it's about a 50-50 cost sharing between the provinces and the federal government.
Right. Yeah, Bernie talked about that in this program. He thought that single-payer health care should be, he wanted to follow kind of a Canadian program where it started in Canada, it started in Saskatchewan and then spread across from province to province. And as a consequence of that, you've got each state administers its own program and pays for about half of it, but then the Canadian federal government administers the other half and sets the standards for the entire nation. Right?
They subsidize it, and that's the way they kind of control it. Because if a province tries to do, to alter or to get away from the Canada Health Act, the federal government say you can do that, but we're going to take away some of your funding.
So, Michael, as a physician in Canada who has lived your entire life there, you've used the health services. You just told us a brilliant story about that, and you also practice in it. What do you say to Americans who say, Canada has terrible waiting lines, they have terrible service, they have 1/10 as many MRI machines and CT scanners per capita as the United States. You don't want to go to Canada, you don't want to get sick, and you don't want a health insurance system like Canada. We have 30 seconds, Michael. What's your response?
I feel sorry for all of you in the United States. I honestly do.
Really? Wow.
Yep.
And
there is a parallel private system. If somebody wants to go and buy an MRI, I can go to Kamloops, the closest one, pay $700 and get one in 2 days.
Yeah.
But
it's only $700. They're like $4,000.
So if I go through the public system, I might have to wait 3 months.
Yeah.
So big deal. But if it's an emergency, there's absolutely no difference between Canada and the United States. If you need a CT scan or an MRI because you've got a stroke, it'll get done.
Yeah, and it'll get done in a matter of minutes or hours. Michael, thank you for the call. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for listening. I appreciate it. Great to hear from you. A Canadian physician speaks to Americans. I feel sorry for you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Absolutely remarkable. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. Guy in Falls City, Washington. Hey, Guy, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I've called before. We were talking about the Trump thing and what he's doing. I think what's happening is we have a corporate media. Now, they are a smokescreen. Trump is a smokescreen for what the 115th Congress has bills they've been passing, which is handing America over to big multinational corporations. And going back to Reagan, when Watts gave the oil that's being pumped out of North Dakota today was given away. Our postal service has been given away to UPS and the other big corporations. That's what's going on in this country right now.
Yeah, there's a major push for privatization, and the oil industry has way too much power. And yeah, I agree with you. There's, how would you say it? We have some serious problems here. And I would say that Trump isn't just a smokescreen for Congress, for what Congress is doing. Trump is a smokescreen, or Trump's whole, hey, let's tweet about Al Franken, for example. He understands the media in the United States probably better than any president in my lifetime, maybe Bill Clinton, but Donald Trump really understands the media. He was part of the media. He was a TV star, reality TV star. He was in big-time wrestling. He ran beauty pageants. He understands media. And he knows that the media does not give a rat's ass about details or policy. So if you lie to people all day long, the media in the United States will not call you on it, because the two things that they do, and it's all they do, and it's why so-called news shows have now turned into a news anchor talking to two or three, pundits, right, and discussing the issues of the day. The only things that the media does now, the corporate media in the United States, are drama. Who's doing what, who's accused of what, how terrible are they, et cetera, and sports, who's winning, who's losing, who's ahead, who's behind, who's going to win, who's not going to win, what do you think about this person versus that person as a candidate, and never do they say, hey, what do you think about the fact that Roy Moore, for example, wants to make it illegal for women to have an abortion? Or what do you think about the fact that Roy Moore wants to cut taxes on wealthy people? Or what do you think about the fact that Roy Moore thinks that everybody should have a gun? Or, et cetera. I mean, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with, Roy Moore is probably the wrong example, because he's what he is alleged to have done is so egregious that he should just be out of the race tomorrow, right now. But Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, for example, who's not involved in any kind of scandal, but nobody's talking about the policy positions that these Republicans are taking. People like Johnson or Tom Tillis or Cory Gardner or whatever. And Trump is providing a very comfortable, very convenient, very friendly smokescreen for all of them. And what's going on in Congress. And only occasionally does it bleed through. You see a headline in the New York Times or the Washington Post that the Republican tax plan is not good for working people. It screws everybody who's making, basically less than $1 million a year. And, but that's about as close as you can get to actual news. You won't find it. You won't find very much of it anyway on television. So, yeah, Guy, spot on. Good point and well made. Guy, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. And then goes Friday. Marty in Farmington, Michigan. Hey, Marty, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to SiriusXM.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for giving me a chance to speak with you.
You're welcome.
I have a question for you about this horrible Republican tax bill.
Let's call it a tax scam, because that's really what it is.
Yes, indeed. So we have corporations have a nominal 35% tax rate, but they're actually paying 18%.
Correct.
So that means that they have at least 17 percentage points of loopholes and deductions.
Right.
So if they lower the nominal rate to 20% and they don't eliminate those loopholes and deductions, which they haven't,
they start paying 3%.
That means corporations will essentially be paying, on average, almost nothing in federal taxes. Do you think that's correct?
Your math is, as far as I can tell, perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I just haven't seen that aspect discussed in any of the media coverage of this.
No, it's because the media coverage, the problem with media coverage in the United States right now, and this is a really serious problem that is not being discussed because the media, of course, doesn't want to discuss it. And in fact, the media tends to attack people who discuss the media and say, oh, you're being, anti-American or something, or you're trashing our country, or you're not, whatever, which just strikes me as bizarre. But the media does not like to talk about detail. They don't like to talk about policy, because detail and policy are considered boring, and boring loses viewers. Viewers want spectacle. They want drama. They want sports. What do most Americans watch on television? They don't watch the news. Most Americans on television are either watching, football on Saturday, or they're watching, essentially soap operas at night. Or during the day, not the old-fashioned soap operas, but basically, almost all of your shows, all of your entertainment shows, whether they're about, people who have special powers, or people who are cops, or people who are, tracking down bad guys in Central America, whatever it may be, they always have a large element of drama in them, interpersonal relationships between the people, and eventually even the cop shows become soap operas. So the news looked at that, the news industry, and when Ronald Reagan changed everything in 1987 and made the news industry a for-profit industry, the news industry looked at that and said, okay, how do we maximize profits? Well, we've got to go with what people watch on television. What people watch are drama and sports. And so if you tune into television and you're wondering, gee, what are the policies that are happening right now? What is the EPA doing to our air and water? What is Ryan Zinke in the Interior Department doing to our national parks? What is Donald Trump planning on doing to our tax policy, for example? You will not find the details. You will not learn the details unless they just happen to be bumper stickers, right? Oh, it's just for the rich. Or, oh, no. It's everybody gets 20. Every average American, that you have to include Bill Gates and David Koch in an average, right? Average Americans will get $2,000 a year in tax breaks. Not true, of course. Or maybe it is true if you average, but it assumes this enormous economic growth. But the point of the matter is that all you're going to get out of the media when it comes to actual factual information is the bumper stickers, because the bumper stickers will then be attached to the butt, basically, or the tail, the bumper on the back of the car. Let's say, get away from sexual metaphors. The bumper stickers will be attached to the bumper of the car, and the car is the drama and the sports. And so that's 90% of what. Last night, Louise and I watched about an hour and a half of network news, in quotes, cable TV news. And I kept saying, are we learning anything, or is this just drama? And in that hour and a half, I think maybe there were 2 or 3 times where there was some sort of factual detail discussed. All the rest of it was who's up, who's down, who's ahead, who's behind, who's good, who's bad. That's the problem, Marty.
I'd like to propose a bumper sticker that basically says the Republicans are proposing to virtually eliminate corporate taxes.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right.
What's going on here?
If our tax rate right now is 35% and the average corporation is paying 18%, then you've got, what is that, 12% basically in loopholes? No, 35. That would be 17%. You're right, 17%.
Yeah.
And so you drop that top tax rate from 35% down to 20%, and you still have 17% worth of loopholes. You're paying 3% in taxes. And corporations in America are loving the idea of that. The stock market is loving the idea of that. Who's going to get screwed as a consequence for that? Average taxpayers, you, me, the people who work here, and anybody who's making less than a couple $100,000 a year is going to get screwed by this. And increasingly, actually, if they do away with the alternative minimum tax, people making a couple $100,000 a year are going to do very well too. It's going to be basically anybody making less than $70,000 a year or $100,000 a year is going to get badly screwed by this bill. So, Marty, thank you for the call. Well said. Jim in Sammamish, Washington. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind?
Yes, good morning, Tom. So I thought that Canadian doctor was really encouraging. I'm going on the negative side of things. And I think that the conservative agenda is the elimination of people from contention for resources, like he was saying about dirty air and water. And how they're doing that is accumulating money and power to disenfranchise people.
Particularly
and by item of what's going on in the world is Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine, which you could probably talk about in short form.
Yeah, by disenfranchised, do you mean prevent from voting, which I believe is the actual technical definition of that, or do you mean just bumping people out of the economy?
I think that the conservative agenda of eliminating competition for resources is similar to the bubonic plague, because if you look at the people that died in the bubonic plague, they were denied medical services, they lived in squalor, they didn't have enough money to buy food or have living conditions be better. And you look at the conservative policies, and it's the same difference. Disenfranchise people, keep them barefoot and pregnant, as you said one time, living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
And Naomi Klein really outlines from the 1950s, and I forget the guy who got the Nobel Prize out of the Chicago Institute there.
You're talking about Milton Friedman?
Methodology for hunters in coordination with the World Banks to sell a country's resources like coal or whatever, metals.
Right.
And then the hunter just stores the money that the World Bank gave them in in a Swiss bank account.
Yeah.
But at any rate, if you could talk about that,
I think we just did.
Yeah.
Jim, thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Excellent points, all, Jim. I mean, the conservative agenda boils down to money. That's really what it boils down to. You know, you'll hear sales pitches about Christianity and everything else. It's really about money, including the mega churches.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Our Thom Hartmann University book review of the day is Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies, How Wall Street Took Over Washington. This is from the introduction. Of all the books we researched for this work, the title we loved the most was this one, Regime Change Begins at Home, Freeing America from Corporate Rule. We loved it because it presents as a hard fact something that very few people completely understand. And then he quotes from that book. Since 1980, America has been run by a corporate regime that has co-opted both political parties and shifted sovereignty from we the people to transnational corporations. End of quote. Since this book covers some corporate conspiracies, we will no doubt take a lot of heat for that and be deridingly referred to as conspiracy theorists. So we would just like to remind people that the phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the Central Intelligence Agency, be used as a weaponized term with which to discourage people from seeking the truth. We kid you not. CIA document 1035-960, dated April 1, 1967, regarding the agency's concern about the reputation of the American government, in quotes. That document also suggested various tactics for countering, quote, conspiratorial arguments, which confronted the gaping holes critics observed in the findings of the Warren Commission, which investigated, in quotes, they really did no such thing in reality, the assassination of President Kennedy. Quote, the agency also directed its members to employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of the critics, end quote. So as you can see, and as the Freedom of Information Act release of that CIA document clearly reveals, the use of the term conspiracy theorist is actually a conspiracy itself. But if you believe rightly that Julius Caesar and hundreds of other leaders were the victims of conspirators, as they were, then you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right? Well, if anybody actually believes that, then you better read up on your history, boys and girls, because conspiracies are an ongoing and very common occurrence in human conduct. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Are you aware that many friends of Robin Williams believe that his suicide was the direct result of the prescription drugs he was taking, and that over 23,000 suicides are attributed to psychiatric drugs each year in the United States? Did you know that turning prisons into a big business has resulted in the United States having the highest incarceration rate in the history of the world, and the most are just drug crimes? Are you aware that the historic event of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq was actually a U.S. military PSYOPs, psychological operations warfare, program, a completely orchestrated event with the knowledge and assistance of U.S. media, and not a spontaneous event as it was portrayed by our media? Did you know that the Pentagon is sending $1.5 trillion of our tax dollars to their corporate buddies for a new fighter jet that's already superfluous? Are you aware that continuing to rely on oil instead of investing in low-carbon energy solutions will cost us $44 trillion due to climate change? Did you know that companies like General Motors at times know that their products will kill people, but they do nothing because it's actually cheaper to compensate the victims than it is to correct the problem? Then read and learn on, friends. American corporations have been getting away with murder, literally, for many, many years. Just take a good look at their history. The above example of GM is a proven point. Corporate consumer advocate Clarence Ditlow, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Automotive Safety, bitterly criticized the settlement. Quote, GM killed over 100 people by knowingly putting a defective ignition switch into over 1 million vehicles, Ditlow said. Today, thanks to its lobbyists, GM officials walk off scot-free while its customers are 6 feet under. Tobacco companies knowingly lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes for decades, even though there was plenty of known medical proof of their damage. They even knowingly hid that information from the public. Oil, gas, and chemical companies have been knowingly polluting our planet with cancer-causing chemicals and products also for decades, and they know that they're doing it. Pharmaceutical companies have lied and attempted to minimize news coverage regarding the deaths that they know the drugs will cause. That's murder, plain and simple. Maybe you can paint a public relations damage control over that landscape if you happen to have all their tons of money and paid political influence, but it's still murder. Look at the parents of one of their victims straight in the eye and try and tell them it's not murder. Do you honestly think they'll listen to you? This book is an effort to reveal the insanity of corporate greed once and for all. At this point, most people probably care more about their local football team than they do about the workings of our democratic republic. And while we understand their frustration and their reasons, that's not good enough, folks. We have to all get involved to stop these bastards from getting away with what they've been getting away with for far too long. They're robbing us blind, poisoning our planet, hijacking our democracy, and ruining the futures of our children and grandchildren. They must be stopped. As an agent of the U.S. government employed to implement policies to benefit U.S. corporations, John Perkins noted in his classic work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that corporate America has extended its rule beyond our borders. Quoting from Perkins, what we had previously considered U.S. corporations were now truly international, even from a legal standpoint. Many of them were incorporated in a multitude of countries. They could pick and choose from an assortment of rules and regulations under which to conduct their activities, and the multitude of globalizing trade agreements and organizations made this even easier. Corporatocracy had become a fact, and it increasingly exerted itself as the single major influence on world economics and politics. Sad to make this observation, but we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. T. Barnum.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
For example, welcome back to the second hour of our program. For example, in the previous hour, somebody called. I went off on this rant about how we're all talking about drama and who's up, who's down, who's going to win, who's not. Drama and sports rather than policy and details. And I use the example of Roy Moore, which is a terrible, terrible example because that actually. His behavior and his conduct and his personality and all these things, those are actual real issues in a political election. And so I said, and then in midstream, I thought, well, geez, that's a terrible example. Let's use Ron Johnson. So I started talking about Ron Johnson, the Republican senator from Wisconsin. And I just, said, we're not, we don't know what his policies are, for example. Well, I just opened Victoria Jones's newsletter and this is, post the vote in the Senate, or post the vote in the House. It said those projections came a day after Senator Ron Johnson became the first Republican senator to state opposition to the measure, saying it doesn't cut taxes enough for millions of partnerships and corporations. Bizarre. It sunsets so-called tax breaks for individuals and not corporations. I mean, this is just crazy. This is just crazy. Larry in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Larry, what's going on?
You mentioned that Reagan, everything changed with network news when Reagan was president.
Well, in '87, when he blew up the Fairness Doctrine, radio and television stations no longer had to account to the public for whether they were serving the public good. They only had to account to their stockholders. That was a major change from 1928 or 29 when that law was put into place until 1987.
True, but that was not the only reason the network news changed. It changed because of competition, cable, people like Roone Arledge who came through and said, hey, you can make money. And plus the erosion of profits from networks because of all the competition that they had. So it's not fair to say that Reagan getting rid of the Fairness Doctrine was the total cause for it.
It absolutely is, Larry. And I worked in radio news for 7 years back in the 1960s and 1970s, and so I pay attention to the news my whole life, and I remember in '87 when Reagan did this, and I remember 6 months later when CBS moved their news division under their entertainment VP. They used to have a separate VP for news division. I remember driving down the Autobahn in Germany, hearing that story on American Forces Radio, and thinking, oh my God, this is the beginning of the end. And then we saw, over the next 5, 6, 7 years, a major qualitative difference in the type and quality of news we were getting. Yet you're right, the networks were looking for profit opportunities, and you're right that cable was in some ways disrupting their business model. On the other hand, cable has been very, very profitable for their business model. But the fact of the matter is that they wouldn't have been able to look to their news divisions as a source of profit if Reagan hadn't changed the rules of the game.
Well, I think I'll give you this. It certainly had an effect on it, but it was not the only reason. Because I remember in 1975 when ABC News in New York all of a sudden started doing Happy Talk, and they changed their news from hard news to chatter, and all of a sudden people said, hey, the ratings are going up. That's when Geraldo Rivera came on.
Right.
So to say this was all Reagan is really just not true. I do get what you're saying about the Fairness Doctrine. It certainly didn't help it, but
what I'm saying, Larry, is it's sort of like if the NFL had changed their rules in 1987 to say, whichever team comes from west of the Mississippi River gets an extra 5 yards on their side of the field that the other team has to run against. Okay. Just a slight change. The opposing team only has to run an extra 5 yards. You might not see an immediate change, but over the next few years, everybody would recalibrate how they conduct the way that they play football to accommodate that difference. And that's essentially what happened.
The West at the time was not very, very good, so even with a 5 yard...
I'm sorry. I don't know sports well enough to validate it. But you get what I'm saying, Larry. He changed the rules of the game. So you don't expect an instant change. It's an evolutionary change.
It had an effect, absolutely, but it certainly was not everything. And network news was changing long before that because of the profit motive. We are
you're right.
capitalists.
You're absolutely right. And let's not discount or ignore that in 1982, Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act. The last president to have, presided over the breakup of a major corporation was Jimmy Carter, and that was an action that was initiated by Richard Nixon, breaking up AT&T into 7 companies, including, Lucian Technologies, what used to be Bell Labs. And it actually increased shareholder value. It kicked off a massive era of competition and growth as a consequence of that competition among telephone providers and ultimately internet providers. It was a really, really good thing. But Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Act, and that also, began the process of these massive corporate consolidations. And yesterday, the FCC did away with a rule that said the same company can't own radio and television stations in the same market, and they can't own 2 television stations in the same market. So, further consolidation is on its way. And in fact, yesterday, I believe it was CBS and Entercom, CBS and CBS, one of the big radio groups just did a merger too. So it's like, it was in the industry news that I was reading this morning. So it's a trend that has not stopped. It's a trend that's continuing. Larry, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's an important topic. Jane in Friday Harbor, Washington. Hey, Jane, what's up?
Well, good morning to you, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to talk about my work with resistance. I, of course, marched in Seattle on January 21st, but my focus for the last several months, a printout, 13 pages of the Senate and 21 pages of the House. I've called the Senate Republicans probably more than 700 times, and now I'm working on the House since yesterday afternoon and Judiciary over the last few months in oversight. But what I'm doing is I've discovered that these Republican staffers are just wonderful young people and with hope the face of the Republican Party. And so I try to endow them with my information as being a teacher, and what I'm trying to do is encourage them to get us back to a bipartisan civil discourse so that we can get some work done. Yeah. Of course, I hit on all these hot-button topics with them, but I try to be as respectful, civil, and on top of that, I try to give them teaching advice about the National Association of Independent Schools, where I worked for several years as a private school teacher, but just encourage them to see that there are people on the other side of the aisle that want to hear them. And I have learned from this, the metamorphosis of this has been that I have discovered that I think I'm making a difference with the future of the Republican Party, and I'm encouraging anyone to print out the 12, 13 pages of the Senate, the 21 of the House. Get on your phone. I start at 6 in the morning. It takes 4 hours to get through the Senate, and it's taken me 2 days to get to the House, obviously. But I started with the 13 magic makers that voted no yesterday and thanked even Darrell Issa. And then I've moved on now to working just only with the no votes and telling them that I felt that it was a vote against humanity is my catchphrase with these young men and women. And I always ask them, what's your major? Poly, international, econ? And by endowing what they're doing, I'm discovering that they're wanting to have a conversation with me about the importance of working together. And I
Jane,
could go on.
Jane, pardon my interruption, but we're going to
feel about Donald, but this is just an idea I want to put out to your listeners.
Jane, excuse my interruption, but we're going to hit a break in about 30 seconds, which is typically when I start interrupting people. You said you're calling pages?
I'm calling every Republican member of the Senate for several months, and every member of the House.
So you're talking to the person who answers the phone, essentially, is what you're saying.
Pardon me?
You're talking to the person who answers the phone.
I am, and I'm finding that, they're, at least there I'm talking to the future, I hope, of their party, and encouraging them to be involved.
Yeah, a lot of those people are interns, and they're going to go on to, bigger and better things in a really consequential way. I mean, it's a pretty big deal becoming, an intern or a page, in a congressional office, and one of the things that they very often start them at, it's sort of at the bottom, is answering the phone. Well said, Jane. Good on you. You're a one-person lobbying machine. I'm impressed. Jane, thank you so much for calling and sharing that with us. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of your calls here on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. Robin, watching Free Speech TV on Direct TV. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm just calling for just a bit of a food for thought for how the left should use its energy, and I'm going to focus on the problem I have with wasting and chasing our tails with impeachment. Right. We all know about the 3 Gs: gays, guns, and God, and we're actually making some progress with God in a discussion of Islam, and the gays are really assembling underground and fighting back against this, and guns are pretty predictable. We can expect 1 or 2 assault massacres within a year of an election. And so what happens is the right wing knows how to get the left side to be spinning around, wasting its energy, and things like that. And I want to throw the concept of the same with impeachment. And this started in my mind in 2004 when I saw so many good progressives and lefties just frothing at the mouth to impeach George Walker Bush, and it was always a waste of time. And I really think it's a waste of time now. My point of view is that we have in this country some really highly dedicated scholars and lawyers who are watching this impeachment process like a hawk. And when it comes right, they will be able to mount something to do that if that is the case. And so I have a lot of confidence that the structure will defend the Constitution. And my concern is that we on the left are easily chased into and maneuvered into chasing our tails. And so when you say, it's not a spectator sport and get involved and get engaged, my commentary is, okay, well, where are you going to use your energy? And to me, there is one and only one real place to use the energy, and that is to fix the voting system, not only in registration, but getting people to the polls, and also fighting the heinous voter restriction processes that the right has put up against us. So that I just want the left to think for a little bit before you waste a lot of time with impeachment. This is just a really silly thing. Besides, conceptually, from my point of view, we have Trump and Spence and these guys' sessions right exactly where we want them. They are actually...
What, in the White House?
What's that?
In the White House?
Politically, we have them where we want them for the next election, because they on a daily basis are motivating people on the left. I think, hey, we really need to get involved, and I just don't want it to be distracted into impeachment. We just don't need to do that. We need to get more Democratic voters to the polls.
Robin, why can't we walk and chew gum at the same time?
What's that?
Why can't we walk and chew gum at the same time?
We can't. We absolutely can. But I am trying to say, okay, well, let's do more walking regarding the polls, and let's do less chewing of gum regarding impeachment. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, I think impeachment is a long shot right now. The fact that you've only got 5 members of Congress who are supporting an impeachment resolution, at least at this moment, is an important starting point. I would not, however, discount what might come out of the Mueller investigation and how that may actually lead to impeachment. But your point is well taken, and the two original sins in American politics right now that the Republicans are using are voter suppression and big money in politics, and both of those are the cancers that need to be cut out. Thank you, Robin.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Tom's Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Marcy in Arlington, Texas. Hey, Marcy, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Marcy.
I'd like to speak to the lifetime appointments. Shouldn't that be unconstitutional? I mean, like the tally guy that, is being considered for a federal judge.
Yeah, the guy who's a lawyer with 3 years as a lawyer who's never tried a case in a courtroom.
So incompetent.
Yeah, but his wife is friends with Trump.
Even the Supreme Court. Now,
Marcy,
our Constitution has amendments. So why cannot an amendment be made against lifetime appointments? Well, it's so counterproductive.
I disagree, Marcy. The founders and framers wanted the judiciary to be completely independent of political influence. And if you know that you have to stand for election or appointment every 4 years, 6 years, 2 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, then you start reacting to political wins and to political donors and to politicians who might be in a position to appoint you or help you get elected. And I think that's one of the major problems that we have with judgeships around the United States in local areas. This is one of the reasons that you have what's called venue shopping, where lawyers will say, oh, you know, there's this one county in Texas where we know we can always get a favorable ruling to a bank. Why? Because this one particular judge got a hell of a lot of money from banks for his election, and they get him reelected every 2 years or whatever it is. And so, you know, venue shopping is happening as a result of the lack of lifetime appointments to some extent. The other thing is, Marcy, I would point to you the number of times on the Supreme Court that people with lifetime appointments, once they got on the Supreme Court, stopped being partisan hacks and started being statesmen and women, and you know, started actually looking at issues with a little less partisan lens. Now, you know, Scalia and Thomas really kind of blew that up. They defied that model and they stayed totally partisan. Thomas still is, and now you've got John Roberts and apparently Neil Gorsuch all being hyper partisan, but you know, they would be that way whether they were appointed every 6 years or whether they were appointed for life. I think lifetime appointments for some judgeships, for federal judgeships, is actually a good thing. Marcy, have I convinced you?
No.
No. Okay. All righty. Well, we'll have to agree to disagree. Marcy, thank you for the call. It is a topic probably that we, not probably, it's absolutely a topic that as a nation we should be having more conversations about. Marcy, thank you so much. Ted in Black Diamond, Washington. Hey, Ted, you wanted to talk about Jeff Sessions?
Good morning, Tom. Yes. I listen to this, and Jeff always says, oh, I don't recall, and then the incriminating evidence comes to the light of day, and then all of a sudden he does recall, and more comes along. Why isn't he ever required to present his PDAs, his day runners, personal assistants?
Jeff Sessions?
I mean, every major meeting that he has is recorded and documented. It doesn't have to be his memory.
Presumably. I mean, this was during a presidential campaign. There was probably a lot happening on the fly, a lot happening ad hoc. Whether Jeff Sessions was documenting it or not, I mean, you know, he may have been not documenting it just so that he could have plausible deniability.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, you know, but he has assistants. You know, you couldn't imagine that somebody like him in his position could make it throughout the day without.
I guarantee you that's what Robert Mueller is looking at, Ted.
Yeah, I just find it to be very.
Yeah, that's why Robert Mueller is going after Hope Hicks, is because she was the keeper of the gate, both back with the Trump organization in Trump Tower and then with the campaign and now in the White House. And 29-year-old gatekeeper, right? She's going to be interviewed by Mueller, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be a big deal. Ted, thank you for the call. Paul in Castle Rock, Colorado. Hey, Paul, got about a minute and a half to the break. What's up?
Hi, Tom. So glad to talk to you.
Thank you.
I know that you've said a lot about Medicare Advantage plans.
I'm not a fan of them, yes.
I don't really understand why I'm in one.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in Medicare for 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in insurance for 30 years. And the benefits that I get vision, I get hearing, things that aren't covered by Medicare.
Sure. And you're getting those things, Paul, because the insurance companies are being spiffed by Medicare on top of your premiums. You're paying a premium, but Medicare is paying a hell of a lot of money to these insurance companies to offer these Medicare Advantage programs. And it's more costly to all the rest of us for you to be on Medicare Advantage than it would be if you were on straight Medicare, number one. And number two, it's another person who is being, your plan is being administered by a for-profit company that is also billing the government, me and you, for their profits. And if you were on straight Medicare, that would not be the case. I get it that you're getting a few additional benefits. You're also, if you get real sick, probably going to discover you're going to have a few additional liabilities. But the main reason I'm not a fan of Medicare Advantage is because it's not Medicare. These are private insurance plans that are funded in part by Medicare and funded in a small way with your premiums. And it's to the benefit of the insurance companies. This is how United Healthcare is the principal providers of Medicare Advantage programs. And this is why their CEO, Stephen J. Hemsley, has been able to take over $1 billion in compensation over the last decade. I don't think it's a good thing for our country. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. Stick around.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Crisis Without End. This is a collection of essays about nuclear power compiled by Helen Caldicott and edited by Helen Caldicott. I'm reading from the introduction which she wrote. She is the world-famous Australian pediatrician, physician who has been speaking out about nuclear power and whatnot for years and years. On March 11, 2011, an earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale struck off the east coast of Japan. Within days, the ensuing tsunami had induced the meltdown of 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. During the earthquake, the external power supply was lost to the reactor complex. The pumps that circulate up to 1 million gallons of water per minute to cool each reactor core ceased to function. Emergency diesel generators situated below the plants kicked in, but these were soon swamped by the tsunami. Without cooling, the radioactive cores in units 1, 2, and 3 began to melt within hours. Over the next few days, all 3 cores, each weighing up to 100 tons, melted their way through 6 inches of steel at the bottom of their reactor vessels and oozed their way onto the concrete floor of the containment buildings, a fact that the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, the power plant operator, continued to deny for months after the disaster. At the same time, the zirconium cladding covering thousands of uranium fuel rods reacted with water to create hydrogen, which initiated hydrogen explosions in units 1, 2, 3, and 4. Massive quantities of radiation escaped into the air and water, 3 times more noble gases, argon, xenon, and krypton, than at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in 1986, and huge amounts of other volatile and non-volatile radioactive elements, including cesium, tritium, iodine, strontium, silver, plutonium, americium, and rubidium. Fukushima is now described as the greatest industrial accident in history. The Japanese government considered plans to evacuate 35 million people from Tokyo as other reactors, including 4 at Fukushima Daini, several miles along the coast from Fukushima Daiichi, were also at risk. Meanwhile, thousands of people fled the area around the smoldering reactors, but they were not notified when the radioactive plumes were traveling, despite the fact that there was a system in place to track the plumes. As a result, people fled directly into regions with the highest radiation concentrations, where they were exposed to high levels of whole-body external gamma radiation, inhaling radioactive air, and swallowing radioactive elements. Administering inert potassium iodide to the exposed people would have blocked the uptake of radioactive iodine in the thyroid glands. Unfortunately, it was not supplied except in the town of Miharu, where there was a conscientious mayor. Prophylactic iodine was, however, distributed to the staff of Fukushima Medical University in the days following the accident, after extremely high levels of radioactive iodine, 1.9 million becquerels per kilogram, were discovered in leafy vegetables near the university. Iodine contamination was already widespread in leafy vegetables and milk, while other isotopic contamination from substances such as cesium was widespread in vegetables, fruit, meat, milk, rice, and tea in many areas of Japan. Fukushima disaster is not over and will not end for many millennia. The radioactive fallout, which has covered vast swaths of Japan, will remain toxic for hundreds of thousands of years. It cannot simply be cleaned up, and it will continue to contaminate food, humans, and animals. It is unlikely that the 3 Fukushima Daiichi reactors that experienced total meltdowns will ever be deassembled or decommissioned. TEPCO claims such a massive undertaking will take them at least 30 to 40 years. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, predicts that it will be more than 40 years before any progress can be made because of the dangerous levels of radioactivity at the damaged reactors. This accident is identical to the Chernobyl catastrophe in its medical implications. The Fukushima meltdowns will induce an epidemic of cancer as people ingest radioactive elements. The single meltdown and explosion at Chernobyl contaminated 40% of the European landmass. Already, according to a 2009 report published by the New York Academy of Sciences, over 1 million people have perished as a result directly of that catastrophe. Large parts of Europe will remain radioactive for hundreds of years, as will now be the case in Japan. In assessing the impact of the Fukushima disaster on Japan and on the planet, and in assessing the safety of nuclear power overall, it is imperative to understand and evaluate the biological and medical consequences of exposure to the kinds of radioactive elements that were released during an accident at a nuclear power plant. Fact 1, no dose of radiation is safe. Each dose received by the body is cumulative and adds to the risk of developing malignancy or genetic disease. Fact 2, children are 10 to 20 times more vulnerable to the carcinogenic effects of radiation than adults. Females tend to be more sensitive than males, while fetuses and immunocompromised patients are also extremely sensitive. Fact 3, high doses of radiation received from a nuclear meltdown or from weapons explosions can cause acute radiation sickness, including hair loss, severe nausea, diarrhea, and bleeding. Reports of these illnesses, particularly among children, appeared within the first few months after the Fukushima accident. And then it goes on, the types of ionizing radiation. Crisis Without End by Helen Keller.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, in the last hour, I was defending lifetime judicial appointments, and Melissa in Twitter, Melissa Hanby, says, I agree with no lifetime judgeships for one reason. The majority of judges right now are men and will be for a long time. That's actually a fairly strong argument. It really feels to me like we are at a moment that may be much like the United States experienced in the late 1860s and early 1870s after the Civil War, where we had over a dozen members of Congress expelled because they had been supporters of the Confederacy. You had these huge battles between the radical Republicans, Thaddeus Stevens and friends, the people who were in favor of Reconstruction, who were in favor of sending militia down to the South to make sure that the rights of the newly freed slaves were protected and all that kind of thing, versus the old guard in the party who were opposed to that. And it's like this cultural shift, and I think this is a really, really important, good, healthy thing, even though it's going to be, and it is, painful for people who, particularly men who, were adhering or behaving under old standards of behavior. And they weren't even standards. They were things that were frowned upon, but not radically, attacked. And I just don't, this kind of behavior is not going to stand anymore. And that's a good thing. And so we'll see where it goes. But I think that this, at the same time, there's going to be debates, there's going to be factionalism, there's going to be all kinds of stuff coming out of this. But how do we make this transition? She's making a very good point. You've got patriarchy established in our judicial system. And, quote, Judge Roy Moore is probably a great example of that. And that needs to be rooted out. Is it going to take, we're going to have to wait literally a couple of generations until all these men get flushed out of the system. And then on top of that, you look at Trump's judicial appointments, 90% white, over 80% male. Of course, if there ever was a spokesperson for patriarchy, it's got to be Donald Trump. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. Kristen in Camas, Washington. Hey, Kristen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, you were talking about loopholes earlier, excuse me, especially for corporations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a cancer survivor and spent a huge amount of money on my treatment, and that's going to go away, my medical deduction.
Right.
I have a child who is very, very ill. That deduction's going to go away. And I'm a teacher, and that deduction's going to go away.
Right.
It's like, it's so... And I moved from California to Washington, so my house is $500,000. So that deduction's going to go away.
Right. Plus your moving expense deduction is going to go away. Basically, and every single one of those deductions that's going to go away for you, Kristen, that money is going to be repurposed to give to the billionaires in the United States.
I know.
And around the world, actually. There's $85 billion in tax breaks that foreign investors are getting as a consequence of the House bill.
And then they added wording in, for the, repealing the ACA. So if my cancer comes back, I'm going to die.
Right. Yep.
Literally.
Yep.
Literally, I'm going to die.
Yep.
And these people have no morals. It's so...
Well, they have a moral system, Kristen. The Republicans have a moral system, and it's based on Calvinism. It's based on this idea that John Calvin promoted back in the day that, if everybody is evil, if people are born evil because they were born of woman, and woman was the original sin, if everybody's evil, Christianity says, we've all sinned and therefore we need Jesus to redeem us. The Calvinistic version of this is we're all evil and we need God to send us somebody to save us from ourselves. And so who should that somebody be? And John Calvin looked around and said, well, obviously the rich people are displaying the blessings of God. God helped make them rich. And so therefore rich people should run the world. And that's actually a coherent worldview. It's completely wrong and crazy, but there's a coherency to it. And Republicans have bought into this as a justification for sucking up to billionaires and multimillionaires and big corporations. And the whole idea of benevolence, hey, Bill Gates just gave $100 million to stop Alzheimer's. Why? Because he said there's Alzheimer's that runs in his family. Well, hey, if Bill Gates had paid $100 million more in taxes, the National Institutes of Health would be, finding a cure for Alzheimer's, and I'd frankly be a lot more confident in it. So, yeah, forgive the rant, Kristen.
It's so frustrating. And plus, this whole Calvinistic view is in direct opposition to the, hate the moneylenders and going against Jews. There's no logic.
Yeah. Like I said, there is an internal logic to it, but it's one that I think is culturally and morally corrupt, for lack of a better way to define it. Kristen, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your story. It's an important story, and stories like yours need to be heard. They need to be heard far and wide from coast to coast, and hopefully a lot of people heard your story. Thank you. Alex in Edison, New Jersey. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First of all, my heart goes out to the previous caller. I hope she'll be okay, and maybe the Senate will do the right thing again.
Yeah.
But that being said, I'd like to disagree with you on a matter.
Okay.
Last week, I think, or earlier this week, you said that it's ridiculous that student loan debt cannot be discharged in bankruptcies.
Yes.
I feel that would totally destroy the market for student loans.
That provision, Alex, in law was only put into place in 2005 with the Bankruptcy Reform Act that was principally promoted on the Democratic side by Joe Biden and Debbie Stabenow, and on the Republican side by Mitch McConnell, and I'm not sure who the lead was on that. And so, the student loan system was working just fine before 2005, and you could discharge student loans with bankruptcy.
Would you loan somebody, whatever it is, let's say $50,000, a 22-year-old who intends to study full-time, money without it being co-signed?
Depends on who I am. The federal government, first of all, I don't think that these should be loans. I mean, we're apparently, Alex, you and I are operating in different frames. I look at most of the other developed countries in the world, pretty much any European country. not only can you go to college for free, if you go to college in Finland, they pay you $200 a month, and all the way to MD or PhD. And so I don't think there should be any student debt or any student loans at all in the United States. And what we learned from the GI Bill experience was that every $1 we invest in paying for young people to go to college, we get back over the next 30 or 40 years of their working lifespan, we get back $7 in taxes that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Not just, $7 in taxes from their being productive. We get a lot more than $7. But for every dollar we invest in their education, society, the United States government gets $7 over the next 30 to 40 years. That's a very good return on investment. So the whole idea that we would saddle young people with debt in order to become productive members of society by building a skill set, by going to college, is, in my opinion, crazy. All it benefits are the money lenders.
I completely agree with you. And as long as we're going to have that system, then the government should be doing the lending. And the fact that we have this type of peonage for students coming out is crazy.
So let's blow that up rather than sit around and fight with each other about, whether I'm going to have to subsidize your loan because you declared bankruptcy, or vice versa.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks a lot, Alex. I appreciate the call. Brent in Hillard, Ohio. Hey, Brent, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So you were commenting on the lack of nuance in cable news. These shows are on 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, live. They have plenty of time to dig in. And you can watch any one of them at any time, sometimes for a week. And they may only cover 2 or 3 subjects.
Yep, absolutely. And at the same time, in that same block of channels, you can look at France 24, Agence France 24. You can look at Al Jazeera. Well, pretty much not in the United States anymore, but you can still watch Al Jazeera internationally online in English. You can look at RT. You can look at BBC. You can look at Deutsche Welle, the German service. Any of those services, in a 1-hour newscast or even a half-hour newscast, you're going to see 15 or 20 really solid stories covered. You watch an hour of cable news in the United States, all you're going to hear are drama and sports, basically, in a political context, and a lot of talking heads.
It really is out of control, and I'm concerned about not so much the youth, because the youth are pretty smart in our country.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the folks who maybe lack education, and this is what they think is news, right? Because they grew up with Tom Brokaw, and they assume that what is being put on Fox or MSNBC or CNN or pick your poison is the same level of detail that the old guard had.
Right, and Brent, you're describing the Fox News viewer. The average age of a Fox News viewer is 69 years old, and the vast majority of them are white. And yeah, I agree. Very, very well said, Brent. Thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. Much appreciated. Coming up on 15 minutes before the hour, or 45 minutes past the hour. Stick around, back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stay right here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Paul in Castle Rock, Colorado. Hey, Paul, what's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey, Paul. I'm Paul. You're Tom. We were talking about Medicare Advantage.
Right.
And I guess I didn't get to the point that the main problem is that we have all these holes in Medicare.
Yeah, Medicare Advantage is about a 20% hole.
Secondary insurance, but I can't afford if I get sick. I have Medicare, and then I have the Advantage because I have the stop loss. Why don't we have stop loss for regular Medicare?
I don't know what you're talking about, Paul.
How often do people go broke on Medicare because they have a $200,000 bill.
Well, I had probably at least a $200,000 bill last year when I had back surgery, and I never even saw a bill from Medicare.
Because you had secondary insurance.
That's correct. Yeah, I do have Medigap insurance.
So we still have. That's what I'm saying. We still have insurance in the program.
Right. That's a hole that was drilled into Medicare in the I believe the late 70s or early 80s by Republicans.
Yeah. Is there anything we can do to
sure
fill in some of those holes?
Make the changes to Medicare that Bernie Sanders has been campaigning for a decade, which is make Medicare a 100% program like Lyndon Johnson envisioned it, like it was when it started.
Like it should be.
Yeah, like it should be, exactly, like the Canadian system is. It's just that Republicans had to figure out a way to shovel some money to their bankster buddies. And so, they said, okay, Medicare is only going to pay 80% of costs. So, if you want to pay that 20%, good luck. If you don't want to pay that 20%, get an insurance company. And then on the backside, what's invisible to most people is, Paul, your Medigap insurance, or maybe it's built into your Medicare Advantage. My Medigap insurance is not only do I pay a premium, but they're also getting a subsidy from the federal government. The insurance company is.
Yeah.
So for every customer they get more money from the federal government. This is insanely profitable for the health insurance companies, these banksters, and it's cutting, for people like you and me, the benefits that arguably we could get. I mean, every dollar that goes into the pocket of one of the 100+ people at United Healthcare who are making $1 million a year, every dollar that goes into their pocket is a dollar that's coming out of somebody's care.
I understand. I know my mother was paying, for secondary, and she was paying like $3,000 a year.
Yeah, that's about what I'm paying.
And if we got rid of those holes, that would be a moot point.
Yeah,
and
I
guess
I agree.
That's where I'm headed.
Yeah, me too. And I don't disagree with you. I think that it's a conversation that we really need to be having right now in the United States. And it's such a tragedy that instead of having a conversation about how do we get corporate power out of Medicare, we're instead having a conversation about, well, we're not even having the conversation. The Republicans just voted to cut $500 billion out of Medicare, right? That was their last budget. $500 billion cut out of Medicare, $1 trillion out of Medicaid. And in fact, the bill that passed the Senate yesterday, or the House yesterday rather, would lead to, according to the Congressional Budget Office, would lead to an immediate $25 billion cut in Medicare and more down the road, right? Because statutorily they're limited to only cutting $25 billion out of Medicare per year. So this is the beginning of the destruction of Medicare, and it's not even being discussed. That's crazy. Paul, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us, Luke Vargas, Talk Media News' UN New York-based reporter. Luke, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, North Korea, we've got some movement there, some anti-move. What's going on?
Definitely anti-movement. I think this is the closing of a very narrow door, if even a real door, that President Trump opened to negotiations during his trip to South Korea. Remember, he stood in front of the South Korean National Assembly, and the White House was really excited about this speech because he said, look, despite everything you've done, North Korea, we're willing to let you in out of the cold and engage in negotiations with you if you drop your missile program and your nuclear program. Well, we have seen the chances of that reduced to zero today. A North Korean delegate to the United Nations told Reuters that there is no way North Korea would consider sitting down at the table unless the U.S. offered the major concession first, namely stopping all of its military cooperation with South Korea. And that's important because this comes a day after the Chinese insisted that they still believe freeze for freeze, which is the U.S. stops or freezes its cooperation with the South Koreans in exchange for the North freezing its missile and nuclear programs, as the best option. for dealing with North Korea. And that's really important because when we heard President Trump on Wednesday give his speech recapping the Asia trip, one of the highlights, the big diplomatic breakthroughs he claimed, was that he'd convinced the Chinese to back away from this notion. Quite the opposite. Both the Chinese now and the North Koreans seem to be in lockstep, saying that it's the United States, not the North Koreans, that has to be the one to sort of give a concession first before dialogue is possible. So the diplomatic outreach President Trump seemed to be hyping up is not going to come to fruition.
Wow. And so not only has China turned their back on us, metaphorically, but so have all the business people in the United States who have decided that China first is a better policy than America first. The Ivanka Trump and her line of clothing, Donald Trump and his line of ties, all the Apple. I mean, pick your corporation, right? They will continue manufacturing in China even if the Chinese take North Korea's side against us. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I will point out, I mean, for all the talk about promoting American trade interests overseas, there's only one country that we've now heard from after President Trump toured the Asian, East Asia, basically trying to tout new trade deals. Only one has stepped forward to say they're interested, and that's the Philippines, which is something, but it is the 36th largest economy in the world, smaller than Denmark, and I'm sure that if President Trump said his big trade accomplishment for the year was getting Denmark to agree to even talk to the United States about a trade deal, we'd be not calling that a major victory.
Yeah, if California is the sixth largest
here.
Yeah, if California is the sixth largest economy in the world, then the Philippines are probably the size of Texas economic-wise, or something like that. Anyhow, the climate change summit is underway. This is the one in Bonn?
Exactly. Yes, it's technically hosted by Fiji, but they decided, I think wisely, not to make everyone go out there for the summit. So they're holding it in the stuffy confines of Bonn, Germany.
Right. And what is the United Nations basically saying about the state of climate change right now?
Well, the Secretary General of the UN has been increasingly vocal, and he really used all those Atlantic hurricanes as an example to say, look at the effects of global warming getting worse. I think there was a little bit of nerves here at the UN that he was so quick to tie together increasingly strong storms and climate change with the actual hurricanes that came through the Caribbean and hit the United States. Alas, that's what he did. Look, the UN is taking climate change seriously. These are serious talks that are going on, and there is one country that is not going to be part of this agreement in several years, and that's the United States. Of course, Nicaragua and Syria were also countries on the outside looking in when it came to the Paris deal in June, when Trump said he wanted to get out of the agreement. Both of those countries have now signed on. This is a story that's been well reported, but it again is a vivid illustration of the fact that the U.S. does stand apart here at these talks. And we sent two delegations. There was a delegation from the White House that has been the most visible and vocal contingent of American diplomats at these climate talks. They were the ones that really ruffled feathers earlier this week. They held a big event in which they were talking up fossil fuel investment, saying we need to have
clean coal, they were saying.
Of course, always clean coal. And
no such thing, by the way.
By contrast, you had a State Department diplomat, Judith Garber, who's an undersecretary, actually gave the U.S. speech yesterday, and you can tell she's being pulled in multiple directions here. I mean, on one hand, I think she probably represents the majority of American civil servants who were pleased to see diplomatic efforts culminate in the Paris Agreement. That said, she said everyone knows President Trump's position on this. What the U.S. is going to try to do here is thread the needle and just sort of lean back on American businesses to deliver reductions in emissions while the U.S. government keeps its foot off the gas or sends the car in the other direction.
Plus, we've got the Northeast Compact. You've got, I don't remember how many states, 7, 8, 9, 10 states, something like that in the U.S. Northeast that have a climate change compact. And now, California's been a big leader in this, and California, Oregon, and Washington State, particularly now that Washington State's legislature has flipped entirely Democratic. Those three states, I'm guessing within 6 months we're going to see a major climate change compact come out of this West Coast alliance. In fact,
I think so. Yeah, I was at an event several weeks ago during the UN in New York, which had the governors of California, Washington, and New York all together, and they hinted that a sort of multi-state emissions trading program was something that was in their minds. And so I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, we are. I mean, we got cap and trade in the Northeast. So Saudi Arabia, I was reading a story yesterday suggesting that the king is about to resign. Now, this is gossip, I guess. But, what's going on in Saudi Arabia?
Well, we've been hearing that rumor of a change in leadership for some time now, and it's getting only louder week by week. We're hearing it could be early spring, but nevertheless, the biggest problem right now is this blockade on Yemen continues. The UN is really freaking out about this, saying we've got so many people about to starve, about to die from cholera, and the aid keeps getting thwarted. The Saudis say they're opening up borders, but there is little evidence of that after many days of them promising.
And almost 1 million people on the verge of starvation.
Yeah.
Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elizabeth Colbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History. This is from the prologue. Beginnings, it's said, are apt to be shadowy. So it is with this story, which starts with the emergence of a new species, perhaps 200,000 years ago. The species does not yet have a name, nothing does, but it has the capacity to name things. As with any young species, this one's position is precarious. Its numbers are small and its range restricted to a slice of eastern Africa. Still, its population grows, but quite possibly when it contracts again, some would claim near fatally, to just a few thousand pairs. The members of the species are not particularly swift or strong or fertile. They are, however, singularly resourceful. Gradually, they push into regions with different climates, different predators, and different prey. None of the usual constraints of habitat or geography seem to check them. They cross rivers, plateaus, mountain ranges. In coastal regions, they gather shellfish. Farther inland, they hunt mammals. Everywhere they settle, they adapt and innovate. On reaching Europe, they encounter creatures very much like themselves, but stockier and probably brawnier, who have been living on the continent far longer. They interbreed with these creatures and then, by one means or another, kill them off. The end of this affair will turn out to be exemplary. As the species expands its range, it crosses paths with animals twice, 10, even 20 times its size. Huge cats, towering bears, turtle as big as elephants, sloths that stand 15 feet tall. These species are more powerful and even fiercer, but they are slow to breed and thus are wiped out. Although a land animal, our species, ever inventive, crosses the sea. It reaches islands inhabited by evolution's outliers, birds that lay foot-long eggs, pig-sized hippos, giant skinks. Accustomed to isolation, these creatures are ill-equipped to deal with the newcomers or their fellow travelers, mostly rats. Many of them, too, succumb. The process continues in fits and starts for thousands of years until the species, no longer new, has spread to practically every corner of the globe. At this point, several things happen more or less at once that allow Homo sapiens, as it has come to call itself, to reproduce at an unprecedented rate. In a single century, the population doubles. Then it doubles again, and then again. Vast forests are raised. Humans do this deliberately in order to feed themselves. Less deliberately, they shift organisms from one continent to another, reassembling the biosphere. Meanwhile, an even stranger and more radical transformation is underway. Having discovered subterranean reserves of energy, humans begin to change the composition of the atmosphere. This, in turn, alters the climate and the chemistry of the oceans. Some plants and animals adjust by moving. They climb mountains and migrate toward the poles. But a great many, at first hundreds, then thousands, and finally perhaps millions, find themselves marooned. Extinction rates soar, and the texture of life changes. No creature has ever altered life on a planet in this way before, and yet other comparable events have occurred. Very, very occasionally in the distant past, the planet has undergone change so wrenching that the diversity of life has plummeted. 5 of these ancient events were catastrophic enough that they're put in their own category, the so-called Big Five. What seems like a fantastic coincidence, but is probably no coincidence at all, the history of these events is recovered just as people come to realize that they're causing another one. When it's still too early to say whether it will reach the proportions of the Big Five, it becomes known as the 6th extinction. The story of the 6th extinction, at least as I've chosen to tell it, comes in 13 chapters. Each tracks a species that is in some way emblematic. The American mastodon, the great auk, an ammonite that disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous alongside the dinosaurs. The creatures in the early chapters are already gone. And this part of the book is mostly concerned with the great extinctions of the past and the twisting history of their discovery, starting with the work of the French nationalist Georges Cuvier. The second part of the book takes place very much in the present, in the increasingly fragmented Amazon rainforest, on a fast-warming slope in the Andes, and on the outer reaches of the Great Barrier Reef. I chose to go to these particular locations for the usual journalistic reasons, because there was a research station or because someone invited me to tag along on an expedition. Such is the scope of the changes now taking place that I could have gone pretty much anywhere, and with the proper guidance found signs of them. One chapter concerns a die-off happening more or less in my own backyard and quite possibly in yours. If extinction is a morbid topic, mass extinction is, well, massively so. It's also a fascinating one. In the pages that follow, I try to convey both sides, the excitement of what's being learned, as well as the horror of it. My hope is that readers of this book will come away with an appreciation of the truly extraordinary moment in which we live. And then jumping to page 15. The same way acoustical engineers speak of background noise, biologists talk about background extinction. In ordinary times, times here understood to mean whole geological epochs, extinction takes place only very rarely, more rarely than even than speciation, and it occurs at what's known as the background extinction rate. This rate varies from one group of organisms to another. Often it's expressed in terms of extinctions per million species years. Calculating the background extinction rate is a laborious task that entails combing through whole databases worth of fossils. And then she goes on to talk mammals, it's about 0.25 per million species years. So on. Book, The 6th Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You know, sometimes you look at the way Republicans behave and legislate, and it almost seems like that there's an intentional Republican campaign to reduce the American populace to peonage, to poverty, and to prevent the American people, or the vast majority of the American people, from having a decent education. I mean, why would the Republicans in this tax bill make it so that you can no longer deduct your student loans? Why would they make it so that if you work, well, Nick Caper, I just retweeted his tweet, actually. He tweeted, when I was a PhD student, my stipend was $18,000 and my waived tuition was $55,000. Okay, so in other words, he was getting $18,000 in cash for teaching. He's a grad student, PhD student, a grad student, and he's getting 18 grand for teaching, and they're waiving his tuition, which would otherwise be $55,000. Under the new Republican tax bill, he's going to have to pay income taxes on that waived tuition as if he had received it as cash. So then he goes on to say, taxing someone who only receives $18,000, the same amount as someone who earns $73,000, in order to give billionaires a huge tax cut, is the height of Republican insanity. Jess Phoenix then goes on to say, all of this just to give more money in corporations and wealthy people who are already doing just fine, thank you very much. Record profits for corporations, record gains in the stock market. Combine this new grad student tax with losing the student loan interest deduction, and we see where we're going. An educated population, Jess Phoenix tweets, an educated population is dangerous to an oligarchy. Remember what Jimmy Carter said on this program about the current state of American democracy? He said, as a result of Citizens United, we are now an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. As the result of the Citizens United decision, and the ones that set it up, right? Buckley and McCutcheon and First National Bank and all these. So Jess, spot on. An educated population is dangerous. In fact, I'm going to retweet this right now. Is dangerous to an oligarchy. The GOP claim is to be for jobs and economic prosperity for all, but this action shows otherwise. They are gutting our ability to innovate and educate, to give their wealthy buddies a nice holiday gift. And that's exactly what is going on. It is exactly what's going on. There's no other way to say it. And Jess, she did a great job of just nailing this. I mean, just a great job. And this is all summarized over at commondreams.org by Jake Johnson, the staff writer, in a new article up at the top of the page. All-out class war. GOP bill cuts taxes for private jet owners. Yep, there's a new tax break if you own a private jet. But it raises taxes on students. Brilliant. Just what we all needed, right? These guys are heartless souls and, anyway. Dave in Holyoke, Mass. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
I wanted to tell you that back in 2000, I started listening to your show, and inspired me to become a poll worker.
Good on you.
Honest to goodness. Did it for 10 years, and the meeting when we got sworn in, they made me our city clerk made me the warden down at the precinct where I was running. I thought that was funny. I was about 30 years old, and the precinct building where people voted was a senior citizen housing project, and all my coworkers were 80-year-old women.
Wow. Well, we need more of you, Dave. I mean, the next generation needs to be stepping in and stepping up, and taking over all this stuff.
I got disabled about 2010. And I don't do that anymore, but I listen to your show all the time. But I wanted to mention that it feels to me like since about the 80s, when the conservatives really wrenched hold, that we've been kind of forced to think like adolescent boys societally.
Yeah, the infantilization of the U.S. population.
I swear to God. And it seems to have taken, they've done it in marketing and advertising and politics, television, cinema, music. From the 80s on, we're all like selfish little bullied 13-year-old boys. Every conservative I talk to my age, I'm 52, the conversation always turns, they feel like they're being attacked, and it's also personal. And
they're such snowflakes, these conservatives.
And I'm like, yeah, that's how little boys used to bullied.
Yeah.
Or bullying.
I got to tell you, Dave, though, this is, I think in our political dialogue and political discourse that the Reagan administration really mastered this, and the Republican Party has been singing this tune ever since. And of course, Reagan made structural changes in how our media functions that also led to this infantilization. But I used to back in the 70s, I was a trainer for the American marketing centers. And I used to teach people in advertising agencies. I was a partner in an ad agency, Terra Graphics, my partner, Terry O'Connor, great guy. And I used to teach people in the advertising business, mostly entry-level people, how to do advertising and marketing. And then in the 90s, Louise and I started an ad agency in Atlanta, Chandler, McDonald, Stout, Schneiderman & Poe, DBA, the Newsletter Factory, and built that company up, and we sold it off to our employees in 97 and retired to Vermont. But in both cases, I was teaching marketing and advertising to mostly Fortune 500 companies around the United States. And the main message of advertising is you are the most important person in the world. That's the first message of advertising. That is the subtle whisper behind all ads. Dove soap, right? Your skin is the most important skin on earth. Captain Crunch cereal, is going to make your kid happy. Your kid is the most important kid on earth. And that is an infantilizing message, but it is at the core of advertising and public relations, and has been since the 1920s when Edward Bernays and others basically invented the modern PR and advertising industry, back during the Woodrow Wilson administration to sell us on going into World War I.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, back in the 70s, I was 74, 75, I was about 10, and I went to a parochial school, and they taught in the English class, which was called Language Arts, they taught advertising, and they taught us they gave us the 7 tools for effective television and radio advertising: repetition, exaggeration. You remember what they were 5 or 7 key points in advertising. They don't teach that anymore.
Right. Yeah, they don't. Well, nobody wants anybody to know that when you are watching an ad, you are being subject to basically mind control. I mean, it's an attempted influence, but it's a very, very sophisticated attempted influence. That these days, ad agencies hire psychologists. They hire companies that do EEG neurofeedback to actually watch people's brain waves as they're testing their ads and things. And I understand all this. I'm not even necessarily explicitly opposed to any of it. I just think that we should know about it, right? There should be some transparency in this.
Right. And too much of a good thing is not a good thing.
Yeah.
There's no balance with these conservatives. There's absolutely they're so greedily minded, like little selfish children, that they'll ruin the whole thing just to get, they'll ruin the pie to get the biggest slice.
Well, and this is I keep talking about the hoarding syndrome that we see among very, very wealthy people. I am convinced that if the Koch brothers' daddy hadn't, died rich and left them a fortune, and not just the Koch brothers, a whole bunch of folks in this category, the people who are fighting for more, the Walton family funding Frank Luntz to come up with death tax to do away with the inheritance tax, that this is hoarding syndrome, only instead of applied to newspapers and tin cans, which poor people have to do, it's applied to numbers on in a digital checkbook. It's how many billion do I have today, George? Dave, thanks a lot for the call. Excellent points all. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Anything Goes Friday. More of your calls right after this. Welcome back. Susie in Eureka, Montana. Hey, Susie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Great. What's up?
I watched a documentary about Scott Kelly, who's the American astronaut who spent a year in space.
Mm-hmm.
And one statement he made just sent me right back to something my father, who's, World War II vet and part of that greatest generation,
right,
that were we're without most of their wisdom these days.
Yep.
But anyway, astronaut Kelly said, you know, I've kind of offhandedly, I've been working for this government for almost 40 years. And that took me back to, I don't know, first or second grade when children talk about what their dads do for a living, or at least back in the way back.
Sure.
That was something that was, you know, asked about.
Oh, yeah, in the 50s and 60s, it was, you know, bring your dad to school day. And,
what did my daddy do? What
right,
does your
exactly.
daddy do?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Career day, I think they called it.
I asked him that evening because he was civil servant, and I really didn't explicitly know, and I was kind of led to believe I shouldn't talk about it.
Uh-huh.
So I asked him, Daddy, what is it you really do? And I knew he worked at a computing center, and this was a long time ago, so it was on an Air Force base. And I said, so do you work, you're civil servant, so do you work for the government? And I think the strongest voice he ever used towards me was an immediate, adamant no. I have the honor of serving the people of this country.
Wow. Your dad got it.
And yeah, but I don't think Scott Kelly, who's my age,
yeah,
who's old enough to basically be retiring out of the astronaut program,
right?
I don't think he even understood there was a difference.
Well, that was that major shift. I mean, you know, Ronald Reagan, I think it was his first inaugural address. It might have been his first State of the Union address, but it was very early in his administration, where he said, government is not the solution to your problems. Government is the cause of your problems. And we shifted, or a lot of us shifted at that moment to thinking, and stopped thinking of government as we had in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s, as us working together to improve life for all of us, and started thinking of government as them that was evil and greedy and trying to hurt all the rest of us, because that's how billionaires view government that tries to regulate their behavior. And so the worldview about government that the billionaires have been holding is just, you know, it's dysfunctional, right? The worldview itself needs to change. Susie, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and what a great story. Your dad was brilliant. Thank you, Susie. We'll be right back. Okay, Louise.
I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Malcolm in Park Forest, Illinois. Hey, Malcolm, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Great. What's up?
I called to back you up on that fairness doctrine to that conservative troll that called in, you know.
Well, I'm not sure he was a conservative troll.
Whatever, you know, every day is Halloween with these people, you know.
Okay. So what's your
kind of mask disguise they're going to come in?
What's your argument, Malcolm?
And then I want to agree with the lady who talked about lifetime appointments for these judges.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need people like Thomas, Scalia, and Roberts hanging around till they get so old they dry up and blow away in the wind.
But don't you want Ruth Bader Ginsburg hanging around that long?
Well, her maybe, yeah, but you know, that's unfortunately that's the upside. But the downside is, you know, the three unholy ones that I just named. I call them the three unholy ones. The trio. You know?
I get it, but Malcolm, they would not be there if Republicans had not stolen the White House. I mean, you know, if
listen, I wish you would use that word more often and let people understand. These people have been stealing our democracy and elections have been big time since the advent of Ronald Reagan.
Amen.
Ronald Reagan was a pivotal figure, much more so than people realize in this country.
Oh, he was a major transformational. Barack Obama President Obama pointed that out. You know,
and so you know, he was criticized for doing so, by the way, which I thought was foolish. But I agree with you about the fairness doctrine, and I've been trying to wake people up to the fact for years that we need to do a better job of getting our message out into the red states, into the you know, the Klan and the Nazis and the Fox perverts, I call them, you know, and let them realize that the very people they love and support are screwing them big time.
Yeah.
Until they get the message, we're going to continue to have this seesaw back and forth, and this country really is in danger as a sovereign nation state it used to be. And I'm really concerned about our nation, you know.
Me too.
We're going to have to do something to turn this around. We need to find a good, solid presidential candidate, somebody that with a powerful, magnetic, you know, personality like Obama or FDR, or someone who's got a brain in his head and loves his country and loves truth and justice. And maybe we can turn this thing around, you know.
Well, Malcolm, yes and no. I agree that we need good candidates who are solid and who can get things done. But let's not slide into salvationistic thinking. Let's not for a minute believe that we have to sit around and wait for the perfect politician to come along and save us all.
We need to pick someone, use a little common sense in picking the candidates that we support.
We have, exactly. We have a role to play in this.
FDR, wonderful. Obama, wonderful. Richard Nixon, no. The Bush dynasty, no. Trump dynasty, no. You know.
There you go.
You know, we need to draw a big X through those names, you know, those candidates in that party. So this right-wing conservative extremism got to go. We need to launch a very powerful, I mean, brutal, vicious attack on these right-wing conservative fascists, I call them. They're endangering the very survival of America, and these people got to go. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we need to get it together, you know.
I understand your sentiment. I'm not down with brutal and vicious, but I.
Well, I am, because that's what they are.
I get it, but
General Patton, wasn't the way he was. He wouldn't achieve the great victories that he did.
But I'd say the same thing about Jesus and Gandhi, Malcolm.
Like Nazis and fascists, you have to be strong and do what's necessary in a powerful way.
I don't disagree, Malcolm, but as much as
nice to these right-wing conservatives trying to be intelligent, decent,
Malcolm.
And look at the results. Look at what's in the Oval Office now. Us trying to be good guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Malcolm. I got it. All that said, we have to be getting active. We need to bring this up. And by the way, I said I'm not down with vicious and whatnot. Mahatma Gandhi took on the British Empire and beat them. Jesus took on the Roman Empire and beat them. Martin Luther King took on the Southern racist empire and I would argue beat them. Now, it hasn't fully matured, that beating of them, but it never does immediately in a single generation. All using nonviolence and love. I really believe that love is one of the most powerful forces on earth. Love and forgiveness. And which is not to say you don't stop fighting. And it's not to say that you give up or roll over, and it's not to say that you let them get away with this stuff. But I really believe that we need to be offering a positive vision. Van in Pleasanton, Texas. Hey, Van, what's up?
How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
That's good. I just want to know what the reason is for tearing down all the Civil War statues.
Well, I don't think all the Civil War statues should be torn down. I think, any of the statues to the side that defended the United States of America should be kept in place. If you've got, a Ulysses S. Grant statue out there someplace, good. But I think that the statues to traitors who murdered 600,000 American citizens in the process of trying to destroy the United States of America, they don't deserve a statue.
I say it was a terrible war.
It absolutely was a terrible war, and it was a terrible war that was initiated by traitors. We do not celebrate treason in the United States, Van. I don't know of any statues to Benedict Arnold. Do you?
It wasn't about slavery.
It absolutely was about slavery. In fact, read the South Carolina Articles of Secession. They start right out by saying it's all about slavery. Van, it was. Thank you. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'm just, I got no brook with traitors. We'll be back.
Hey, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Cracking the Code, How to Win Hearts, Change Minds, and Restore America's Original Vision. This is from the introduction, page 1. My wife Louise and I live atop 30 feet of water, 100 feet from shore, in a houseboat on a river in Portland, Oregon. Or at least we did when I wrote this book. One day, I stepped out our back door onto the floating deck that serves as our backyard and found myself confronting a very upset Canada goose. He bobbed his head up and down, lifted his wings to make his body look larger and more intimidating, and ran straight at me, hissing and trying to nip at me. Obviously, observing this behavior, my comedian friend Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman, who was visiting us that week, named the bird Gooselini. I had no idea why this psycho goose was attacking me, but there was no mistake that Gooselini was trying to communicate. Stay inside that house and don't come out. I got the message, but I didn't stay inside. Instead, every time I went out to water the plants on my deck, I brought a broom with me to fight off Gooselini. I found out what was going on a week later when I learned from my neighbor the female goose had settled on her back deck just a few feet from our own and was sitting on a nest. I realized that Gooselini must have been the proud papa protecting his territory, and I stopped swatting at him with my broom. Gooselini has a lot to tell us about communication strategies. Even though he was just doing what a gander does when he wants a predator to leave, draw attention to himself and away from his mate, attack first and ask questions later, he was able to communicate the go-away part of his message to me pretty well. We all communicate all the time, even when we don't give much thought to what we are saying or how we're saying it. Because Gooselini was unable to use what we would call rational powers of persuasion, he communicated by going straight for the more primitive parts of my brain, the parts we shared as human and goose, the center of our gut feelings. First time Gooselini attacked, I backed off because he was successful in communicating an intent to harm me, which caused me to feel fear, the most primal and visceral of human emotions. The first key to unlocking the communication code is to understand that when we communicate, feeling comes first. Emotions will always trump intellect, at least in the short term. This emotive form of communication, however, ultimately didn't get Gooselini the response he wanted. On its own, the attack wasn't very persuasive. Instead of shooing me away, Gooselini made me angry. Effective communicators know how to get the response they want because they understand how to tailor a message to the person who's listening. They know the second key to unlocking the communication code is that the meaning of a communication is the response you get. Because Gooselini couldn't tell me his story, I had to imagine his story for myself. The first story I came up with was that he was simply a psycho goose trying to harm me for no reason I could understand. Second story I came up with after talking to my neighbor was the story of a dad protecting his soon-to-be hatched goslings. Both stories accurately described what was happening, but the stories led to very different endings. The psycho goose made me angry. The dad goose made me feel protective of Gooselini himself. In this book, I call such stories maps, and the world the stories describe as the territory. The third key to unlocking the communication code is, therefore, the map is not the territory. Each story captures a different piece of reality. No one story captures it all. The key to effective communication is to find the best story to use to convey your understanding of the world to the greatest number of people. In politics, we tell each other stories all the time. Think about it, politics is really nothing more than a large set of stories. The United States of America began as a story that the founders and framers told about a society that could live in harmony around the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The country was held together after the Great Depression and through a war by a story told by Franklin Roosevelt, which he called the New Deal. Ronald Reagan told a very different story, one we're still in, that he called the free market story. In Reagan's story, our corporate CEOs should run our society instead of our elected representatives because, as Reagan pointed out and probably believed, quote, the best minds are not in government. If they were, business would hire them away, end of quote from Reagan. Most of the stories we hear in the media today are scary. We're told to be afraid because the world is a bad place and people are untrustworthy. Every goose is a Gooselini without understanding why. These scary stories are profitable to our infotainment industry and to the politicians who are typically allied with the barons of the infotainment industry. There is a different story, however, in which every Gooselini is a proud papa. It is a story of a world that is interconnected and of people who are fundamentally good. This is actually the traditional American liberal story, which has been told and understood since the first telling of it during the Enlightenment by thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, and Thomas Jefferson. It's the story that reaches directly back to the founding of this country. My aim with this book is to give you the tools to tell the liberal story and to tell it well. I'll show you how the process of communication is coded, actually hardwired into our brains, and help you crack that code to become a brilliant communicator. First, though, a few concepts it's important to master. Everybody wants the best outcomes, and their behavior reflects the best tools they have to achieve those outcomes. Another way of saying this is that people always make what they think are the best choices given the circumstances and the tools they have. All behavior has at its roots, the goal of a positive outcome. As a practical statement, this means that conservatives and liberals are both working toward the best world possible. And then it goes on from there. How do we differentiate this? How do we communicate this? The book is Cracking the Code. It's about the communication code.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Anything Goes Weekend, let's call it, on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, thanks for calling. What's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
Yeah, I was wanting. You hit on a lot of the topics I wanted to hit on. You know, like getting a candidate that'll be for the people and will have the people's needs, that'll stand for the people's needs instead of those of the oligarchs. You know? And then and then not only go for single payer health care, free education, and I think paying student athletes would be something that could they should look into too. Because these student athletes, they've had enough. They've created monies, millions and billions of dollars for these universities and colleges where they've redone stadiums and built halls and all kinds of stuff. And I know the student is there to get an education, but that's not always guaranteed. But if he got paid or she got paid, as a student athlete, along with their education, I think that would help a great deal too.
Don't a lot of student athletes now, Maine, and forgive my ignorance of this, I don't follow sports, and I'm guessing these kind of stories are buried in the sports pages, but I thought that a lot of student athletes got essentially spiffed, for lack of a better word, by wealthy donors or wealthy alumni. They'd be provided with vacations or goodies or housing or meals or whatever. Or is that, or am I recalling a scandal where that was happening and it got forbidden?
Well, I believe that was part of it, but I'm talking about the average student athlete that's not that you may not see on TV. Right. Along with the basketball players and the football players and stuff like that.
Oh, you're talking about the track team and the volleyball team and the whole bit.
Yeah. Volleyball team, right? The swimming.
Yep.
I think all student athletes should get paid because they bring in quite a bit of income to the university.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you were to make a comparison, if a student is working as a graduate student in a research lab and they help develop a product that gets sold to industry from the university, I don't think right now those students or graduate students who are working on that get any piece of that. I think the university does, but they don't. And I think, frankly, that's probably wrong. And if we're looking at students who are making money for the university in the academic field, why not also, look at students who are making money for the university in the sports field? And what's happening right now is in both of those fields, the students are getting screwed and the university is making out like a bandit. And should we reevaluate all of that, frankly?
Right.
I'd see it. I would look at a top to bottom, reevaluation. And also, this whole idea that college presidents need to be paid $1 million a year. That's nuts. But yeah. Good points, Maine. Thank you. Good food for thought and for discussion. I appreciate the call. Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi, Tom, my friend, the smartest man in media.
Thank you.
Anyhow, one quick question for our friends in Alabama. Is it still too late to register? Can you still register for this election?
That's a good question. I don't know the registration deadline for Alabama. There was an interesting, I think it was on Twitter, maybe it was in our chat room this morning. I'm pretty sure it was on Twitter, though. Somebody was talking about how, they wanted to register to vote. They applied 2 months ago for their birth certificate from their home state so that they could get the ID necessary to register to vote. And their birth certificate just arrived, and whatever state they're in, it's now a month too late to register to vote. So, these are the kind of impediments that Republicans are throwing in front of people in order to prevent them from voting. And, people need to know about that. Hey, get ready, it's coming, and plan well in advance. It's going to cost you some money. Yes, it's a poll tax, and it's going to cost you some time. Yes, it's a huge hassle. I had to make 4 trips to the DMV in Washington, D.C., each time going back. Oh, you don't have enough documentation yet. Oh, this utility bill isn't a good enough utility bill. Oh, this isn't actually a rental document, et cetera, et cetera. All to try to suppress the vote. And D.C., I mean, it's is a fairly liberal town, but it's under the control of the Republican Congress. So, Jim, thanks. Spot on. I don't know the dates in Alabama. Maybe somebody will call in with that information, or somebody in our chat room will know, and I'll report it to you. Larry in Rogers, Minnesota. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's up?
My wife just simply adores you.
Well, thank you.
But I've got, you're talking about Advantage plans.
Mm-hmm.
You know that medical Advantage plans stop in the end of 2018, early 2019, don't you?
No, I didn't know that, and I don't believe that to be true.
Oh, well, you can check on there's a couple, our new insurance man told us originally, and in the Star Tribune on Saturday, October 21st, in the business section, looming changes hang over Medicare. The annual shopping period ends this summer. It says most of the popular Medicare cost plans currently used by more than 350 Minnesotans are scheduled to go away in 2019.
Oh, the Medicare Advantage plans. That would just be because they're changing them. I just Googled Medicare Advantage plans to end and got nothing. I'm getting Medicare Advantage and end-stage renal disease.
The guy that is doing our insurance says that everybody will be rolled that are in cost plans will be rolled into Advantage plans. There'll be no more cost plans. I think in the article somewhere it says that also, that there will be all the cost plans are being fixed.
What's a cost plan?
Cost plan, there's Advantage plans, there's cost plans. The cost plans are the ones that you can buy in the open market. Advantage plans are the ones that are rolled in with Medicare.
What is COS? I'm assuming that is that an acronym?
Yep, that's what they call them. Cost.
What's it an acronym for?
I wish I could tell you.
Yeah.
I don't really know offhand. Everybody. When I get my Blue Cross Blue Shield, it says cost plan on it, not medical advantage.
Cost,
like
COST.
Medical Advantage. My Blue Cross Blue Shield Blue is a cost plan.
Yeah, we're going to have to get Alex back on the show to talk about this stuff, because you're in over my head, or I'm in over my head, Larry, right now.
Like I said, if you can manage to get a hold of that October 21st article in the Tribune on Saturday in the business section, it talks about it.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can track it down. Larry, thanks for the heads up. Mary in Little Mountain, South Carolina. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hello. I just was wanting to know if you are aware of
the website needtoimpeach.com by Tom Steyer.
Steyer, yes. I saw his ad on TV a week or 3 ago, and I immediately went over to needtoimpeach.com, and is it .com or .org?
.com.
.com, okay. I went to needtoimpeach.com, and I signed up, and I've been getting emails from him about every 4 or 5 days now, about what they're doing. So, yeah, I'm very familiar with it. And I've seen his ads. And in fact, the thing, if you've seen Tom Steyer's ads, Fox News is refusing to run those ads.
Then we would get Pence, though.
Right. So much for corporate freedom of speech. Yeah, then we would get Pence. And I think it's possible to build a case that Pence is at least as toxic as Trump. And, I don't know what to do about that. But just because, getting rid of Trump means the Pence is coming in doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the right thing and impeach Trump. That said, I don't think that leading an impeachment charge right now is necessarily the best use of our time. I really think we need to wait for Robert Mueller's information to come out, because it's looking to me more and more like there's going to be major criminal indictments of, all the way up to the very top. And it'll probably be, Thanksgiving, Christmas in that neighborhood when they get around to interviewing Donald Trump. I would say right after the first of the year, keep an eye out. Things are really going to start to hop. Mary, thank you for the call. Gracie in Worcester, Mass. Hey, Gracie, what's up?
Hi, it's Tracy.
Oh, Tracy, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew about the 5 arrests in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the Capitol building. They were protesting Daryl Metcalf. I guess he's the head of a committee. I'm not sure what committee. Mm-hmm. But there's a bill ready for a vote, an anti-corruption bill. I guess there's unlimited lobbyist gifts in that state and a few other states. And there's a bill ready to be voted on, and Daryl Metcalf is blocking it.
And the bill would do what? The bill would make the situation better or worse?
It would ban a lobbyist gift.
So there's legislation to ban lobbyist gifts to lawmakers, and the lawmakers just had 5 protesters arrested. Is that the deal?
Yes, they left plungers on the Capitol steps because there's one representative is blocking the
plungers
bill from getting
as in unclog your toilet plungers.
Yes.
So is that a reference to the swamp? Is that
Yeah, because he's blocking the bill.
Oh, yeah, it's a blockage. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a Republican legislator in what state was this? Delaware, did you say? Or Pennsylvania?
It's Pennsylvania. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And so there's a Republican.
The name of the group is Represent Us. And their website is represent.us.
Right. Yeah.
You should look them up.
It's a good group. So there's a piece of legislation to ban gifts from lobbyists to legislators that that a Republican in the Pennsylvania State House or Senate is blocking. And protesters showed up in support of that, and they just got busted. That's incredible. Tracy, thank you for sharing that information with me. We've got some of the best informed viewers, listeners, whatever, in the world on this program. It's such an honor and a pleasure just to share 3 hours every day with you. We will be back in just a few minutes, coming up on 15 minutes before the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And welcome back. Dave in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Hold on a second. Just take off speaker here. Listen, not to be too grim about things here, but, I'm beginning to believe we've got a more than 50% chance of this country just going south on us here. I don't see any effort on the part of the Republicans to uphold the democratic traditions that have got us this far, and I'm just concerned about what do we do? How do we respond? How do we know when things have slipped beyond our ability to really make this country what we want?
Yeah.
And I was hoping that maybe you could organize some sort of discussion about, okay, what should we do? How do we plan for the potential outcome, negative outcome to all this?
There are some very troubling signs that our country is sliding in the direction of fascism. I mean, that's just, if you define fascism as the merger of corporate and state interests, and you've got literally the entire Republican Party denying climate change exists, something that could kill all of us, just in order to be able to continue taking large amounts of money from fossil fuel donors, then clearly you have a problem, and clearly that problem could be defined as a fascistic takeover of our government. And then on top of that, you've got the new surveillance state brought to you by 9/11 and George W. Bush's hysterical response to it. And then on top of that, we have the impending corporate takeover of the internet, where the big ISPs want to take the internet over from basically an open internet and lock it down and make it a closed internet like China has, and only for commercial purposes rather than political purposes. But frankly, we shouldn't kid ourselves. These corporations are highly political too. That's how they get their monopolies. That's how they get their deregulation. That's how they block competition, et cetera. So I think that there's a possibility, Dave, that the resistance fails, and I think we're already seeing.
Don't forget about voter suppression and gerrymandering, which are tools that just solidify, cement
absolutely
the Republican majority. So how?
I wrote an entire book about this, Dave. I wrote a book about this. It's called The Crash of 2016, and the basic premise of the book is that every 80 years we have a great crash followed by a world war. And that those are essentially the only moments when our nation has historically reset itself. That you had the Great Depression of 1929 followed by World War II. We completely reinvented America as a result of that. You had the Great Depression of 1857 followed by the Civil War. We completely reinvented ourselves after the Civil War. You had the Great Depression of 1770 and 1769, a great crash, followed by the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence in 1773, 1776, the American Revolution, and we rebooted ourselves again. And the reason it seems those 80 years is that that's about how long it takes for everybody who remembers how badly we screwed it up 80 years ago to die off and not be around to warn us about the stupid things we're doing, like blowing up Glass-Steagall. And so, the premise of the book is that we should all be getting ready for the next crash and war because it's an opportunity. And Franklin Roosevelt saw this correctly. He saw that the great crash of 29 and World War II could flip America fascist, could flip America communist, or maybe we could pull right straight down the middle and make us more quote, democratic socialist, end quote, with Medicare and Social Security and unemployment insurance and end of child labor and all those things. So keep an eye on the economy, Dave. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Steve in the home of the Northern Lights, North Troy, Vermont. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom, greetings from the home of the Northern Lights. A while ago, you asked the question why nobody from Wall Street went to jail. Congress actually issued a report on that in July of 2016. It's called Too Big to Jail. It's about 260 pages or so, I believe.
Really?
Yeah.
I totally missed that. The summer of last year?
It's on the internet. Anybody can dig it up.
Huh.
But, I'm wondering, I watched that movie Snowden, the Oliver Stone movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was just incredible. And it was when Obama had broke all his campaign promises that Snowden finally snapped and did what he did. And like I told your caller, where was everybody? Except for Code Pink and a few others, all the drone strikes on civilians and the security state and And then a little over a year and a half ago, Obama, he dedicated $1 trillion for nuclear weapons upgrades that no sane person would ever use,
Yeah, yes and no, Steve. That a lot of our nuclear weapons were getting old enough that they were getting unstable. And
dismantle them.
Pardon?
Dismantle them.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, but that ain't happening in the current political atmosphere. And yeah, we can sit around and come up with a long list of things President Obama didn't do right. I can come up with a long list of things he did do right. I'm really not interested in relitigating the Obama presidency. I'd like to move forward. We've got a serious problem with a crazy man in the White House, and I say that very intentionally. And surrounded by a bunch of sycophants for petrodollar, for fossil fuel billionaires, and it's a serious threat to American democracy. Brian in Granite Falls, Washington. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I love your show, man.
Thank you.
It's been refreshing to hear your voice on a lot of these issues. So I have two questions, and hold on. First, if you've heard about the Justice Democrat and Bernie candidate in Washington's 9th district and her being shut out of the Democratic State Party van.
No, I don't know anything about that.
She's having some issues with it.
What's her name?
She's having to go through a whole endorsement process, whereas the incumbent Adam Smith is completely able to have all the access to all of the voting.
Yeah, but he's the incumbent. He already jumped through all the hoops. I mean, what's her name?
Sarah Smith.
Sarah Smith. Okay, I'll have to educate myself about that, Brian. But I'm sorry, I don't.
And also, I'm part of the Washington Bernie-Crat Coalition, and we're looking to start some sort of a new local independent media channel to get some outreach from the community on the candidates that we're trying to get into office.
Right.
And I'm looking to see what kind of sort of advice you would give for the progressives and groups that are trying to kind of pursue what you do in a way.
Yeah, I'd say if you want to build an independent media channel, probably YouTube or Vimeo. There's a couple of video venues. YouTube is the biggest. It's owned by Google. But you can build a channel on YouTube. We just passed 10,000 videos on our YouTube channel yesterday. And
wow, congratulations, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And real quick, I want to give a shout-out to whole Washington and the work that they're doing to try and institute single-payer in Washington State.
Yeah.
And if you want to take a look at them, they can be found at www.wholewashington.org.
Is that WHOLE?
Yes.
Okay, great. Wholewashington.org. Brian, thanks for the heads up, and I'll have to take a look at Washington's 9th. Lisa in Seattle. Hey, Lisa, what's up?
Oh, hey, Tom. Good to be speaking with you. I just wanted to share with you, I started a campaign called Close Your Wallet Campaign, and I've committed to calling 2 businesses a day, their headquarters, and I post those numbers on my Facebook page, basically letting them know that due to the amazing tax cut that they received and the tax hike that I received, I was not going to be spending any of my money or patronizing their business this holiday season. I'm encouraging other people to join on, and I call it Close Your Wallet Campaign.
That's a fascinating idea. Maybe a regifting campaign to go along with it, because people like to give gifts.
Sure.
Recycle your gifts, right? Look around your house. We all have stuff sitting around the house that's kind of cool stuff, but we really don't use it, don't need it, don't want it, and somebody we care and love and care about might find it very,
Yeah, and can I close with one statement I think we could all hear really well right now?
Sure.
To be totally radical is to make hope possible, not despair convincing. And I remind myself of that every day.
That's a great slogan or a great quote. Who's it from?
I feel bad. I should go find out because I am kind of stealing.
Yeah. Well,
I might be able to do it.
That's quite all right. Don't feel bad about it, at least. It's a great slogan, wherever it came from.
I think it's really easy to find that negative because we have to stay alert and we have to stay on top of it.
Yes.
But we don't realize the sacrifice we're making, and we're losing hope in that process. So every day I remind myself that to be really radical is to create a space for hope.
Amen. Amen. To be truly radical is to create a space for hope. I love it. Lisa, thank you so much. Ray in Portland, Oregon, listening to X-Ray FM. Ray, we have 1 minute left in the show. You got a quick one?
Did you say Ray or Ron?
I said, Ron, I'm sorry. Hey, Ron.
That's okay. Tom, I have a question about the unemployment rate in the economy and was wondering if any of the geniuses in the White House consider that we're losing 2.4 to 3 million workers per year, all the gray hairs that are getting out of the market.
Right. And that's driving down the unemployment rate because the workforce participation rate is declining.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem we're having here in the Portland area, and I deal with a lot of local companies, they cannot find any replacements.
For people who have been in the workplace for 40 years and have a lot of experience?
Exactly.
Yeah. I tell you, I'm in Portland now, too. And, we just hired one person here from Portland who's just spectacular. I mean, there's some really talented young people in this town. We're so glad to have Arthur with us, and then, of course, Nate and Sean and everybody else. But, Arthur, our local fellow who just joined us. So, I'm not so concerned about the next generation, Ron, as I am. But you're absolutely right. Our unemployment numbers are being skewed by baby boomers aging out of the population. Ron, thanks a lot for the call. Thank you all for being with us today. And this week, it's been a fascinating week. My apologies again for our technical problems yesterday and the day before. We've got that all figured out now. Everything should be smooth, knock wood. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.